Chapter 174. The majestic Kunlun Mountains were undulating. Even in broad daylight, there would always be shadows, and there would always be places where the sun could not shine. The martyr's grave was such a place that seemed to be forever hidden in the darkness. When the dazzling spiritual light shone upon the mountains, everyone gasped in admiration. The light came from far and near, but it did not fall on the back of the dark mountain, unable to shine into the shadows. The corpse stood silently in the dark courtyard, looking up at the light in the sky and the faintly discernible dragon and tiger phenomenon. It galloped unhindered, arrogant, and symbolized the greatest power in the world. After a long while, he turned around and walked into the darkness without a sound, like a lonely ghost left behind in the mortal world. The divine light of testimony was a rare cultivation phenomenon. Many cultivators would not be able to see it even once in their lives if it was not for a fortuitous encounter, let alone a regular person. That was why, although Lu Chen was heavily injured, Su Qingjun helped him sit up in the straw hut on Flying Goose Terrace. She leaned against the windowsill and looked out at the strange light in the sky. Su Qingjun sat by his side and supported him. For some reason, both she and Lu Chen seemed to be unperturbed despite the fact that their identities, positions, and abilities were worlds apart. When she saw the divine light of testimony in the sky, Su Qingjun could not help but feel excited. Even for a publicly acknowledged genius like her, the Yuanying realm was still a distant goal. There was still a long way to go. Not to mention the legendary Great Gate of Life and Death where geniuses would die prematurely. No one could be certain that they could pass it. When she collected her excitement and calmed down, Su Qingjun quickly noticed that Lu Chen's expression was a little too calm as he gazed at the mystical light in the distance. For a lowly errand disciple, the wondrous scene that appeared right now was very likely a realm that he would never be able to reach in his entire life. However, even though Lu Chen looked at it very seriously, he did not seem to be excited at all. He seemed to be calmer than Su Qingjun, like an indifferent and ordinary person. "What's wrong?" Su Qingjun asked Lu Chen. She was a little concerned but also a little curious. Lu Chen replied. Su Qingjun pointed at the light in the sky and said, "You don't seem to be too interested in the divine light of testimony." Lu Chen was startled for a moment. Then he smiled and sighed. "Eldest miss, if you had dozens of wounds on your body like I do right now, the pain would be excruciating, and you would want to faint immediately. You wouldn't be able to lift your spirits for other things." Su Qingjun gave it some thought and agreed. She sighed softly and said, "I was careless." As she spoke, she helped Lu Chen lie down again and said in a low voice, "You should rest well." Lu Chen looked at her face and suddenly said, "What you said outside before, were you serious?" Su Qingjun said, "What?" Lu Chen said, "Of course, when you announced to your master that you wanted to accept me as a disciple." You heard it?" Lu Chen closed his eyes and said, "Your voice was not low at that time." Su Qingjun smiled and said, "I was serious." Lu Chen sighed and said, "Can I refuse this matter?" "What?" Su Qingjun was shocked. It was clear that Lu Chen's reaction was beyond her expectations. Lu Chen didn't say anything and only calmly looked at her. After a moment, Su Qingjun frowned and asked, "Why?" Lu Chen said, "Your master was not happy." Su Qingjun nodded and said, "Are you afraid of him?" Lu Chen said, "Your master is spiritual master Yuanying and I am an odd job disciple. Do you think I should not be afraid of him?" Su Qingjun was silent. After a while, she softly said, "I clearly only want to accept a disciple. Your identity is not the same." Lu Chen somewhat helplessly interrupted her words and said, "Your talent is too good. Everyone has placed too much hope on you, especially your master. So he will definitely not allow anything that could delay your cultivation to happen. Moreover, I am older than you." Su Qingjun was startled and said, "You still care about this?" Lu Chen smiled bitterly and said, "You know I am thick-skinned. Of course I don't care about this. But other people care. You are a 22-year-old young lady and you accepted a man who is several years older than you as a disciple. Moreover, his talent is very poor. What do you want other people to think?" Su Qingjun coldly snorted and a trace of anger flashed across her face. But she didn't say anything. Lu Chen sighed and said, "Of course, others would only think that you're possessed, or perhaps you're young and insensible, and you've been seduced and bewitched by others. Then no one will come to find trouble with you. But if you really accept me as a disciple, I am afraid that the entire Kunlun mountain will not be pleasing to the eye. When that time comes, do you think I can live long?" Su Qingjun looked deeply at Lu Chen and suddenly said, "Your current reaction is completely different from what I originally thought." Lu Chen said, "Oh, then what did you originally think?" Su Qingjun said, "I thought that if I told you about this, you would jump 3 feet high and be elated and in disbelief. Then you would cry bitterly and kneel in front of me, hugging my feet and calling me master." Lu Qin raised his hand with some difficulty and scratched his head. He smiled and said, "It seems that it should be like this." "Well, yes, I have already prepared to kick you away," Su Qingjun said calmly. The corner of Lu Chen's mouth revealed a trace of a smile. He looked at Su Qingjun's beautiful face. After a moment, he gently nodded and said, "Thank you. You are welcome." In the end, Lu Chen ultimately did not become the disciple of the Kunlun party's youngest genius, Jin Dan Su Qingjun. This title, which was enough to make all the younger generation disciples drool, was far away from him. However, probably in order to make up for the harm that Lu Chen suffered this time, and also to better protect him from being targeted and framed by her own family in the future, under Su Qingjun's insistence, Lu Chen still obtained the title of a nominal disciple. The title of nominal disciple was very different from the official disciple who formally entered the sect. Basically, it could be seen as a kind of exchange of favors. For example, a certain cultivator with profound cultivation accidentally owed a favor, but this favor was not enough for him to accept a disciple and teach him. Therefore, there was this kind of compromise method and title. Generally speaking, a nominal disciple could not obtain the master's Tao inheritance. It was nothing more than a topic that could be used to brag on normal days, and an excuse to pretend to be fat at one's own cost in times of crisis. Of course, with this title, others could not recklessly bully him. Otherwise, who would know if that master's mood was good or not? If he angered a great cultivator and came to find trouble, wouldn't he be in big trouble? Therefore, this method was equivalent to Su Qingjun giving Lu Chen a talisman. It was equivalent to indirectly telling the people outside that although this handyman disciple was a waste, he was now a nominal disciple of Su Qingjun. They could not casually bully him anymore, otherwise she might be angry and not be polite. For the final result, Masato Kihara did not have any objection. He had seen a lot of nominal disciples and they were not considered real disciples at all. As long as it did not affect Su Qingjun's cultivation and reputation, he was too lazy to care about the trivial matters of the Su family. But even so, with Su Qingjun's current reputation in Kunlun Mountain, suddenly having a nominal disciple, even if it was just a handyman disciple, was still very sensational. Logically speaking, this matter should have been a little troublesome and people would talk about it for a while. But fortunately, during this period, the matter of Dongfang Tao becoming a spiritual master Yuanying was too important. Very soon, it overwhelmed all other trivial matters, allowing Su Qingjun and Lu Chen to breathe a sigh of relief. After Dongfang Tao's divine light of verification appeared, it meant that he had truly broken through the great life and death barrier, and become a spiritual master Yuanying. However, he did not immediately come out of the cave residence, but continued to cultivate in seclusion for more than half a month. Most people could understand this. The Yuanying realm was unusually strong, and it was equivalent to being reborn. After breaking through the great life and death barrier, it was normal for one's aura to be unstable and his foundation to be unstable, and he needed a period of time to stabilize it. And for cultivators, especially high-level cultivators, the safest place in the world was, of course, the cave residence where they cultivated in seclusion. Half a month later, Dongfang Tao successfully came out of seclusion. At that time, most of the Kunlun party's Yuanying Jinren and Jin Dan Friar were present to congratulate him. Even Lord Tianlan, who was not in Kunlun Mountain, sent someone to send a congratulatory message. Among the people present to congratulate him, of course, the leader, spiritual master Idol Month, was the leader. At that time, on the 30 Zhang Peak, there were as many Zenrens as there were clouds, and Jin Dan Jinren could be seen everywhere. It could be said to be a gathering of prosperity for a moment, and it was also a rare display of high-level cultivators for the Kunlun party. It once again revealed to the world the unfathomable strength of the majestic Kunlun. After Dongfang Tao came out of the cave, he was full of energy and his eyes were shining. He was full of satisfaction and he laughed 3 times towards the blue sky. Next to him EXN had already rushed over excitedly, and hugged him with great joy. Dongfang Tao laughed loudly, and then nodded and smiled at Melaleuca japonica beside him. Then he strode towards where spiritual master Idol Month was. A gift of gratitude was still necessary. If there were no sects, there would not be so many spiritual materials and resources. If there were no sects, there would not be such a stable and peaceful cultivation environment. These words, everyone knew in their hearts. Dongfang Tao quickly approached, and just as he was about to greet, he was suddenly startled. He saw that among the group of Yuanying Jinren in front, Spiritual Master Idol Month was standing at the forefront, smiling and nodding at him. However, in front of everyone else, there was another person standing next to Spiritual Master Idol Month. It was a little girl who seemed to be only a little over 10 years old. Her face was calm like the snowstorm on the winter peak, cold and slightly chilly. Chapter 175. On the day that Dongfang Tao became a perfected person and walked out of his cave residence, most of the important figures in the Kunlun party were present. Although the two highest-ranking perfected cultivators in the divine transformation realm did not come in person, they sent someone to send a congratulatory message. Perfected cultivator Qianlan's message was sent by perfected Qian Deng of Baichao Tang. Everyone in the Kunlun party already knew that perfected Qian Deng and perfected cultivator Tianlan had a close relationship, so no one was surprised. On the other hand, Hakushin Jinkuin sent a 10-year-old girl who was of course White Lotus. Under the watchful eyes of everyone, White Lotus stood beside perfected cultivator Idol Month, in front of all the other perfected cultivators. Of course, this was a very meaningful thing, but there was enough reason to tell others about it because White Lotus was holding the wind speech plate in her arms at that time. Hakushin Jinkuin used this treasure as a medium, which was equivalent to directly congratulating Dongfang Tao, so the meaning was naturally different. However, from that day on, everyone in the Kunlun party finally realized that in his old age Hakushin Jinkuin regarded this 10-year-old genius girl, who was said to be a once-in-a-thousand-years genius, as his most valued successor. And because of this, there was another person that people had not noticed before, but now privately attracted attention again. It was the other incomparably powerful perfected cultivator in the divine transformation realm in the Kunlun party, who had not had a successor for many years. What on earth was that bald perfected cultivator thinking? How would I know what the damn baldy is thinking? Lu Chen raised his head and drank a mouthful of wine, then complained to old Ma. Anyway, what I know is that he is the most unreliable person in the world. Old Ma patted his shoulder and comforted him. You have suffered a lot this time. I understand that you are depressed. Believe me, he is not feeling good either. Lu Chen squinted at him, his face full of doubt and disbelief. What's wrong with you, Baldy? Old Ma said sternly, when he heard about this, especially when he heard that you gritted your teeth and endured it for the sake of the big picture, that you would rather be humiliated and seriously injured than do anything, he flew into a rage and angrily scolded the Su family for being bastards. He asked me to tell you that he will remember everything that happened today. Once he succeeds in the future, you don't even need to say anything. When he comes back, he will first start with the Su family. He will kill those blind trash to vent your anger. Bullsh *T. Lu Chen scolded. You've been talking for a long time but you still won't budge. What was the use of that? If you have the guts, you can ask Baldy to go to the Su family now. With his ability, destroying the Su family is as easy as crushing a bug. Why would he waste so much time talking? Old Ma suddenly looked embarrassed. He smiled bitterly and said, this, Immortal is in a different position from us. He has more fetters, so he really can't do whatever he wants. As he said this, his face became serious and he promised Lu Chen again, anyway, don't worry. Immortal has said again and again that this matter is not over. He will remember what happened to the Su family. Sooner or later he will make trouble for them. Lu Chen rolled his eyes with an expression that said, I am not a fool to believe you. Old Ma also laughed and quickly changed the topic. He said with a smile, Okay, let's not talk about this. Anyway, that is what Immortal said. We will know in the future. By the way, are your injuries better? Lu Chen stretched his arm and said, I think they're almost healed. Otherwise, I wouldn't have come down the mountain to drink with you. Old Ma nodded and said, your injuries are recovering really fast. Although most of your cultivation has been crippled, at least your foundation is still there in terms of recovery. You can't even compare to a foundation-building cultivator, let alone an aura refinement disciple. Lu Chen was startled, but he soon nodded and said, I probably swindled a lot of panaceas from Su Qingjun these days. They're still somewhat useful. Old Ma looked at him enviously and said, look at your life, it's too comfortable. Other people work themselves to death to save the beauty, but you just lie there and let the beauty save the black bear. You eat other people's food, use other people's things, and now you're even living outside other people's immortal's cave, right? He let out a long sigh and said with a bleak expression, what a pity, the world is so unfair. I, Ma Xiaoyun, have been an elegant young man for so many years, but why haven't any outstanding women taken a fancy to me? Have all the flowers been stuck in cow dung? Stuck my ass. Lu Chen scolded him without the slightest trace of politeness and said, Just lie there and let other people cut you dozens of times for me to see. Is that comfortable? Why are you pretending to be young? You're still an elegant young man. Wake up, it's been several decades and you've never lost any weight. You've always been like a pig. If it wasn't because that damn Baldy was fatter than you, I would have thought you were the reincarnation of a pig immortal. Even if there were flowers, they definitely wouldn't be stuck in your head. Old Ma's expression turned serious. He pointed at Lu Chen and shouted, I heard you, you called True Monarch the reincarnation of a pig immortal. So what if I called him? What do you want? Lu Chen glared at him. Oh, nothing. Your voice is the loudest, you're the best. Pretend I didn't say anything, Old Ma said calmly. How's the situation on the mountain? Old Ma asked as he poured him a glass of wine. Lu Chen took the wine glass and said, It's all right. The main thing is that Dongfang Tao suddenly became a true monarch. This matter was very sensational and attracted everyone's attention. Plus, I didn't really become Su Qingjuan's disciple, so it's not too conspicuous. Old Ma snorted and said, This time it's really an undeserved disaster. I was disgusted by those 3 Su families' trash. To be honest, if you hadn't stopped me with your gaze that day, I wouldn't have been able to hold it in. Lu Chen smiled and said, It's nothing. It's not worth it to ruin our big plan for those things. Old Ma hesitated for a moment, but lowered his voice and whispered to Lu Chen, Oh right, I've always wanted to ask you. Although you endured it that day, we didn't know that those guys actually hid such disgusting torture tools and made you suffer so much. But if Su Qingjun really didn't come, would you really endure it to the end? Lu Chen turned his head and looked at Old Ma. After a moment, he slowly shook his head and said, I won't. Then you're going to fall out with them? Old Ma asked. When they made their move that day, I had already made my decision. Once their attacks reached the point where my bones and muscles were injured and my life was in danger, I couldn't care so much anymore. I couldn't really wait for death to come, so I naturally had to make a move. Well, I think so too. Old Ma nodded, but then he glanced at Lu Chen. There seemed to be a trace of lingering fear in his eyes. He said, At the beginning you suffered such a serious injury and were cut so many times by those trash. I thought you would have been unable to endure it. Lu Chen smiled as he swept his gaze across his body. Beneath his clothes, countless scars could be vaguely seen on his flesh. He was silent for a moment and then said lightly, After being burned by the black flame for 10 years, I seem to have gotten used to the pain. Old Ma didn't say anything and just nodded silently. What do you plan to do next? Old Ma asked Lu Chen. Lu Chen stretched and said, What else can I do? Continue to live and then secretly find a spy. What should be done has to be done. Alright, help me find some information. What information? The daily routine, whereabouts and preferences of the younger generation of the Su family. The more detailed the better. Old Ma's eyes lit up. There was a trace of excitement on his face. He whispered, What's wrong? You can't stand it anymore? Lu Chen sneered and said, I'm not a saint. Do I have to bear it silently after being dealt with like this? No, I can't stand it. Well said. Old Ma slapped his thigh. The smile on his face suddenly seemed to have a bit of fierceness. He gritted his teeth and said, Isn't it like this? In our line of work, let's compete with each other. Who's afraid of who? Speaking of this, he paused for a moment and hesitated. He said to Lu Chen, But it has only been less than a month. If you immediately retaliate, will it attract attention and implicate you? Lu Chen said indifferently, I endured it that day, so I naturally won't act rashly for the sake of taking revenge. However, I can't let this matter go just like this. I have to find an opportunity to get it back and let them taste the true pain of this world. Old Ma looked at his face and frowned. He seemed to feel a trace of coldness. But soon his face returned to normal. He said, No problem. Anyway, I don't like these people. Don't worry about the information. I'll give it to you next time you go down the mountain. We brothers will kill them. Lu Chen hummed in acknowledgement and stood up, looking like he was about to leave. Old Ma seemed to suddenly think of something. He suddenly said to him, By the way, if you make up your mind to do this, what about Su Qingjun? Lu Chen paused and then said, What's there to worry about? She won't know that I did it. Old Ma nodded and said, Well, that's true. If we do it secretly, we won't be afraid of being known by others. But, I'm just asking casually. I'm a little curious. You said that the Su family is naturally hateful. It's not a big deal if we kill them. But I heard that Su Qingjun is a good woman. She's also very good to you. For you, she not only quarreled with her family, but also flipped the table and smashed the wall. She beat her younger brother. In order to take care of you on Mount Kunlun, she gave you the title of a nominal disciple. Lu Chen raised his eyes and quietly looked at Old Ma. Old Ma's voice became softer and softer. After a while, Lu Chen suddenly asked, "What do you want to say?" Old Ma said, "I want to ask you. Don't you care about her feelings? I was injured and suffered. I want to take revenge. Why should I care about her feelings? But between the two of you, aren't there some, at least mutual appreciation?" Lu Chen's eyes were slightly lowered, like a shadow swaying in the dark. He looked at the light in the distance with no expression. After a while he said lightly, "We are shadows. How can we be qualified to talk about love? You think too much." He turned around and walked out. At the same time, his voice carried a bit of coldness. He said, "Help me find out information about those people. When I do it myself, I think you may be a little relieved and no longer have any doubts." Old Ma stood still and watched Lu Chen walk out of the door alone. After a while, a smile suddenly appeared on his face. But the smile was a bit desolate and bleak. Chapter 176. Dongfang Tao, who had achieved the great cause of Yuanying Enlightened Master, could now be said to be an influential figure in the Kunlun party. He was an important figure that everyone in the sect paid close attention to. After all, it had been 11 years since the last Yuanying Enlightened Master of the Kunlun party was born. All kinds of welcoming and sending off, as well as all kinds of red tape, re-establishing his position and authority in the sect, all matters naturally fell into place. According to the rules of the Kunlun party, as long as one cultivated to the level of Yuanying Enlightened Master, he would be qualified to set foot on the 4 extraordinary peaks in the sky and clouds, the core of the Kunlun party to cultivate. At the same time, Yuanying Enlightened Master's Immortal's Cave in the mountains would also be preserved. After these matters came to an end, Dongfang Tao formally held a ceremony to let Exan enter the sect as his master. She could be regarded as the first personal disciple he had ever accepted. After the news spread, the entire Kunlun mountain was in an uproar, especially among the various aristocratic families in Kunwu City, who reacted even more strongly. Although this news was heard by well-informed people, at that time Dongfang Tao was at most a veteran Jin Dan friar. Later, when he was injured and went into closed-door meditation for a long time, his reputation became even weaker and almost no one had any scruples about him. But who would have thought that this old man would amaze the world with a single brilliant feat? After going into closed-door meditation for a long time, he unexpectedly produced a Yuanying Enlightened Master, which really caught people unprepared. Overnight, the prices of the small E family in Kunwu City skyrocketed. After all, Exan was now Dongfang Tao's only disciple. If nothing unexpected happened, she would very likely inherit Dongfang Tao's orthodoxy in the future. A powerful Yuanying Enlightened Master standing behind him was already enough to deter many influential families in this city. After formally becoming his disciple, Exan's status in the Kunlun party naturally rose to the sky in a single bound. Soon she moved out of the fragrance garden and lived in the 30 Peak. When Dongfang Tao went to cultivate in the clouds in the future, this mountain cave would belong to Exan. There were still a lot of things to do in the following days. There seemed to be an endless stream of people coming to congratulate him and make friends with him. From cultivation sects to influential clans in Kunwu City, from big shops to cultivation sects and forces of various sizes around the Kunlun party, all of them sent people to greet him and make friends with him. Exan has really broadened her horizons. She only feels that the cultivation world in front of her seems to have opened a wider door. However, during this time, the pair of master and disciple on the 30 feet peak welcomed a special guest. When the young man handed the visiting card to Exan and waited patiently with a smile on his face, Exan had a strange feeling in her heart. On the name card there were 2 words, he. When Dongfang Tao received the visiting card from Exan, he was also a bit surprised. He had been out of closed-door meditation for a long time, so he naturally knew some things he should know, such as the matter that happened to Exan that caused a sensation in the cultivation sect. Dongfang Tao was naturally unhappy about the fact that his beloved disciple had almost been disgraced and almost disfigured. To be exact, he was furious and furious. However, the main culprit of this matter, He Gang, had already been dealt with and expelled from the Kunlun party. This punishment was very harsh in the cultivation world, so even Dongfang Tao couldn't say anything about it. Although He was He Gang's elder brother, he almost didn't do anything wrong in this matter. On the other hand, He's status was absolutely not something an ordinary disciple He Gang could compare to. He himself was a talented disciple who was highly valued by the cultivation sect. At such a young age, he had already cultivated to the peak of the foundation-building realm. It was very likely that in the near future he would become a Jindan friar. At that time he would be able to stand shoulder to shoulder with Su Qingjun, who was currently in the limelight, and become a true genius who had the hope of peaking into the Yuanying realm or even the deity transformation stage. Not to mention he was not alone. Standing behind him was the powerful Yuanying spiritual master, Du Kong. The Heavenly Soldier Hall was also very powerful in the sect. If it was still the Jindan friar, the temperamental and easily angered Dongfang Tao might have gotten angry and directly chased Yi away. However, after cultivating to the Yuanying spiritual master, he seemed to have suddenly become a bit timid. Thus he ordered Exan to invite Yi in to meet him. The atmosphere when they met was a bit awkward. There was no so-called meeting to forget enmity with a smile, and there was no amiable, happy and polite scene. Dongfang Tao was indeed an old man with a strange temper. Although he suppressed his anger and didn't target He, his pair of bright eyes stared at He from head to toe. This was not a good sign. Fortunately, He didn't seem to care about this. He maintained a calm smile for a long time. Only when Dongfang Tao opened his mouth to ask questions did he answer them one by one. His attitude was always modest and courteous, neither servile nor overbearing. He even maintained an extremely elegant and courteous attitude towards Exan. It was difficult not to have a good impression of such a person. Even Exan was no exception. In the process of meeting Dongfang Tao, he said many things. Among them there were some messages from his master, Dukan Jinren. The main idea was that Dukan Jinren would personally come over in a few days to bring Dongfang Tao to the strange peak between the clouds and the sky. He would also tell him about some of the special features of the mountain. This was obviously a favor, and it was a favor that was hard to refuse. With Dongfang Tao's temperament, his expression softened when he looked at He. He even praised him a few times. Before leaving, He whispered a few words to Dongfang Tao while Exan was packing up the tea set. Dongfang Tao's expression changed slightly, but he didn't reply. When he looked at He again, the expression in his eyes was different. After He left, Dongfang Tao pondered for a long time. When Exan passed by, he called out to her and said, "Exan, do you still remember the matter with He gang?" Exan was startled for a moment. She didn't expect her master to suddenly mention this matter again. She immediately said, "That matter? I can't say I've forgotten it now. When I saw Senior Marshal Brother He just now, I actually felt strange." Dongfang Tao nodded. After a moment of silence he said to Exan, "If they deliberately harmed you, I will naturally stand up for you. You don't need to be afraid. But since the past is in the past, you don't need to keep it in your heart. You don't need to hold a grudge against He." "Yes, your disciple understands." Exan nodded in agreement. She then glanced at Dongfang Tao and said, "Master, from what you've said, could it be that you have an opinion about this Senior He? It's best if you don't provoke this person." Dongfang Tao said lightly, "You're saying that I can live here in the future?" Lu Chen's expression was a little surprised. Su Qingjun smiled and said, "Yes, the Flying Goose Terrace is quite big. Moreover, I have always wanted to find someone to help me cultivate some precious spiritual herbs. It's a pity that I haven't been able to find someone who I can trust, who has the ability to cultivate, and who is willing to work hard. So now that I've finally caught one, I can't let you run away so easily." Lu Chen clicked his tongue and then said, "Is it really okay for me to live on the Flying Goose Terrace? Won't others gossip?" Su Qingjun said lightly, "Aren't you my disciple in name? Just think of it as me squeezing you dry and making you work for free." The situation she was talking about was not uncommon in the Kunlun sect. Some high-level cultivators would often take in nominal disciples, but they didn't pass on their skills and techniques. Instead, they would just give some spiritual materials and resources or basic techniques as a reward, and then have people specially cultivate important spiritual materials for them. Of course, Lu Chen had also heard about this. However, Su Qingjuan's words were of course a joke. He also laughed, then extended two fingers and said, "I can move here, but I have two conditions." Su Qingjun was stunned for a moment, then she looked a little annoyed and said, "Hey, do you know how many people in the entire Kunlun party have racked their brains to live here? You just have to be the most troublesome person. How dare you mention conditions to me?" "Yes, what you said is very reasonable." Lu Chen nodded repeatedly and said, "Two conditions, do you want to hear them?" "Speak." "First, I don't want to live in this straw hut anymore," Lu Chen said. Su Qingjun was stunned for a moment and immediately became vigilant. She said, "Hey, don't push your luck. You want to live in my cave abode? That's absolutely impossible." Chen laughed and said, "What a joke. Do I look like that kind of person?" "I always feel that you do." "You misunderstood." Chen glared at Su Qingjun, then pointed to the forest behind him and said, "I want to live in a wooden hut. I will cut firewood and build a house myself. It will be bigger and stronger so that it won't be so easily destroyed. Is that okay?" Su Qingjun's cheeks were slightly red and she softly muttered, "Narrow-minded, stingy." What did you say?" "Oh, nothing. You can build a wooden hut. Later when I have time I can also cut down 2 big trees for you," Su Qingjun said seriously. Chen nodded and said, "Second, I want to raise a dog." "What?" Su Qingjun was stunned for a moment and almost thought that she had heard it wrong. Chen turned around and whistled loudly. A moment later a woof-woof sound could be heard. A black shadow ran out from the forest and rushed to Chen's side. It was Tu who was dilly-dallying with him in a very intimate manner. Why is there so many wounds on this dog's body?" When Su Qingjun saw the appearance of Atsu, she also gasped. Chen sighed with a sorrowful expression. He said to Su Qingjun, "This is an old dog that I've raised for more than 10 years. It's been with me through life and death situations. It's covered in wounds and it's about to reach the end of its life. I really don't want to be separated from it. Can you do me a favor?" Su Qingjun looked at Atsu with sympathy. When she was about to say yes, she suddenly felt a little strange. She frowned and said, "But I don't think this dog is old. It is quite energetic." Chen said calmly, "This native dog is very young." "Really? Well, don't just look at how lively it is. Who knows, it might suddenly die in a few days." Su Qingjun was stunned for a moment and quickly waved her hand. "Forget it, it is just a dog. Let it stay. You don't have to curse it like this." Chen laughed and said, "Thank you very much, Atsu, thank you." Before he finished speaking, he suddenly stopped. Chen and Su Qingjun turned their heads at the same time. They saw that Atsu, who was still circling around Chen, suddenly sneaked to the side of the mountain wall. After sniffing for a while, it lifted its legs and peed under a rock not far from the stone door of the cave residence. Then it ran back leisurely, shaking its head and wagging its tail, looking very happy. Su Qingjun's face darkened. She stared at Chen. Chen had an awkward expression on his face. He laughed dryly and said, "You see, this dog is like a human when it is old. It pees a lot, so disgusting." Well? Chapter 177. In any case, Chen and the black dog were now temporarily staying at the Flying Goose platform. Compared to the days when they were working tirelessly as handyman disciples in Baichao Tang, it was much more comfortable. It was comfortable to have Jean Dan Friar looking after them. Since he no longer had to work in the herb garden of the flowing fragrance garden every day, his days suddenly became leisurely. Chen also had more time to do his own things. After his injuries recovered, he began to go to the dense forest behind the Flying Goose platform to cut wood, preparing to build the wooden house he mentioned before. Of course, a wooden house was more comfortable than a straw hut. Moreover, the forest covered a wide area, and there were hundreds of thousands of trees. Naturally, Su Qingjun would not be stingy with these things. Since she was young, she had never seen anyone cut wood to build a house, so during this period she often stood at the side and watched Chen work curiously. It took 4 to 5 days to build the wooden house. After it was completed, Chen was in a good mood. However, Su Qingjun shook her head at the side, saying that the wood of the house was not bad, but it looked ugly. Since he had the status of a nominal disciple and was temporarily staying on the Flying Goose Terrace, it was impossible for Chen to really do nothing and idle around all day. It would be hard for him to explain himself to the outside world. Therefore he picked up his old job and cleaned up the spiritual field on the Flying Goose platform. He also expanded the area. Then, Su Qingjun got some spiritual grass and spiritual fruit seeds and planted them in the spiritual field. From then on, Chen officially became Su Qingjun, the hard worker, who was specially squeezed by Jean Dan Friar to farm. This kind of person was very common in the Kunlun party. Generally speaking, even though people who did this kind of work still had the identity of a handyman disciple, there was always someone above them. It would sound very good if people said that they were no longer a handyman disciple of the Kunlun party, but that they were someone under the command of a certain Jean Dan or a certain Jinren. Wouldn't that be a lot more impressive? Moreover, in terms of profit, the returns of the odd job disciples who worked for these high-grade cultivators were much higher than before. As a result, there were many times when everyone was racking their brains for this position. The reason why so many people wanted to participate in the eagle fruit cultivation competition at the Flowing Fragrance Garden was because they hoped that one day, Su Qingjun would take a fancy to them. The best outcome was actually Lu Chen's current situation. After receiving this kind of treatment, Lu Chen was much more free than before. The spiritual fruits and spiritual herbs planted in the spiritual fields were also not as delicate as the eagle fruit tree that he could not easily leave. As for Su Qingjun, she was also quite polite to him and did not really squeeze him for labor. It should be said that his life was still relatively relaxed. Therefore, Lu Chen now actually had time to wander around the Kunlun Mountains. These days, many people in the Kunlun party saw Lu Chen walking around leisurely with the black dog, which attracted the envy of many handyman disciples. One day after that, Lu Chen brought Atsu down from the Flying Goose platform and took a casual walk. Then they walked to the house near the Flowing Fragrance Garden where someone had once died. Back then He Changxing died in this house. It was daytime and most of the people who lived nearby were the lowest level handyman disciples. Every day they had to go to the Flowing Fragrance Garden to work, so the surroundings were quiet and there were not many people walking around. On the day of the murder, the Kunlun party had sent people to seal off the nearby area, but after a long time of investigation, there were no results. Until now, the disciples who were guarding outside had also been withdrawn. Except for the house that was still unoccupied, this place seemed to be no different from the surroundings. The traces of the person named He Changxing in this world were quickly and completely dissipating. The wind blew gently from the forest. Lu Chen and Atsu stood quietly in the distance and looked at the house. Neither of them spoke, like two dark shadows, silent. After a while, Lu Chen turned and walked to the side. He no longer looked at the house, but walked into the wide forest on the other side. Atsu followed behind him and walked into the forest. During the day, the forest was slightly darker than outside, but the light shone through the gaps between the branches and leaves, making the forest appear brighter, and the surrounding trees could be seen clearly. Lu Chen walked in the forest with a calm expression. As he gradually went deeper into the forest, the surroundings quickly quietened down. The hustle and bustle that belonged to the Kunlun party seemed to be isolated outside the forest. In this forest there was only silence. After walking for a while, he came to the place where he had come here to stare at late at night. That day, in a pitch-black night, this corner deep in the forest was so dark that one could not see their fingers in front of them, completely submerged in darkness. Now that it was daytime, Lu Chen could clearly see that there was actually a big tree in front of him. A big tree that looked very large and dense, older than the surrounding trees. The mottled bark was covered with moss, and a few drops of morning dew still remained on the branches and leaves. The strong roots protruded from the ground, looking like a giant claw tightly gripping the earth. Lu Chen stared at the tree for a while, then walked over. The forest was still silent. There was no wind and there were no birds chirping. At this moment, the only sound seemed to be his footsteps, stepping on the dead leaves on the ground. The trunk of the big tree was very thick and large, requiring at least two people to wrap their arms around it. It was enough to hide the figure that was hiding. But this morning, when Lu Chen crossed the roots of the tree and walked to the back of the tree, it was empty. Atsu ran over and sniffed under the big tree for a while. It seemed that there was nothing special worth paying attention to, so it ran away to play at the side. Lu Chen looked at the big tree quietly, his eyes bright and focused. From the roots to the trunk, he looked at it bit by bit, as if he was carefully searching for something. However, nothing strange appeared on the big tree. There were no wounds, no scratches, and no hidden and twisted patterns. Everything seemed to be fruitless. Lu Chen frowned slightly. After pondering for a moment, he squatted down and carefully searched the roots of the tree that undulated like a horned dragon. He even used his hands to push away the dead leaves and black soil on the ground, and checked every hidden corner of the roots. However, in the end he still found nothing. That evil sect spy hiding in the darkness seemed to have unusual patience and vigilance, and was not tempted this time? Lu Chen stood up, his face solemn. After a moment of contemplation, he called Atsu, turned and walked back the way he came, prepared to leave this place. A beam of sunlight shone down from the branches and leaves above his head, shone on his body, and also on the silent big tree beside him. The mottled traces seemed to have experienced the vicissitudes of countless years. Lu Chen continued to walk forward, but at the fifth step he suddenly stopped. He frowned, seemed to have thought of something. The next moment, his eyes suddenly brightened, suddenly turned around, but stared intently at the front of the big tree, at the ancient and mottled traces on the tree trunk. The sunlight shone down, perhaps because it had experienced too much time. The bark on the tree trunk showed signs of cracking. Even in the daytime, the martyr's grave at the back of the nameless mountain was still shrouded in darkness. The sinister cold air seemed to not recede all year round, emitting a rare energy in this famous mountain. Usually not many people came here. Most of the people, including the cultivators, preferred to live in the light, even if it was the stone walls and caves that were required for cultivation. In fact, most of them were located in the sunny places. But this day, a tall figure walked in from outside the martyr's grave, and knocked on that black door. Dongfang Tao, who had just achieved Yuanying Jinren, came to the martyr's grave, this gloomy place. There was no one around him, indicating that he had come alone. When the chilly wind blew past from an unknown corner, his expression was equally indifferent. Only a trace of deeply hidden disgust could be seen in the depths of his eyes. With a creak, the black door opened. In the gloomy courtyard, those dark rooms stood silently in the surroundings. Some were completely dark, some flickered with dim candlelight, as if guiding the direction of the dead on the dark path. Occasionally, when the wind blew, those little candlelight would actually instantly turn green, like the burning flames in the eyes of an evil spirit. After a moment, it slowly returned to its original appearance. A thin, shriveled figure, whose entire body seemed to be shrouded in darkness, stood alone in the middle of this courtyard. His cold eyes shot out an icy light, coldly looking at Dongfang Tao, who was walking in. Dongfang Tao first looked around, his gaze paused on those dark rooms, and those candlelight for a moment, finally landing on the corpse who was standing there, nodded and said, "Long time no see." The corpse faintly laughed and said, "Yes, you are always unwilling to come here to see me. Of course, we have not seen each other for a long time." Dongfang Tao's expression did not change, and he calmly said, "This damned place is eerie. No one would like to come here." The corpse's gaze turned cold, and his voice seemed to raise a few octaves as he said, "But thanks to you, I have already stayed here for 34 years. Dongfang Tao frowned and said, "Don't talk nonsense. You have sent someone to pass a message to me this time. What is the urgent matter?" After a pause, he suddenly snorted and said, "Also, in the future, if you want to find someone to pass a message to, don't look for he. I don't like that person." Seeing that the corpse did not immediately answer him and instead looked Dongfang Tao up and down, he then laughed coldly and said, "You have become Yuanying Jinren, so you immediately put on airs, huh? Is it that even if I want to find you in the future, I may not be able to summon you?" A trace of impatience flashed across Dongfang Tao's face, and he said, "If you have something to say, then say it. Don't bring up old scores, and I will say it again." He stared at the corpse, and his voice also seemed to become a few degrees colder, and said, "Don't talk to me like it's all thanks to me. You have only yourself to blame for this ending of yours, junior brother." Chapter 178. Lu Qin walked in front of the tree and carefully looked at it for a while. Then, he suddenly stretched out his hand and gently stroked the tree trunk. The rough tree bark felt as rough as a rock as it brushed past his palm. The surroundings were still silent, but Lu Qin's eyes became brighter and brighter. His fingers moved slower and slower. After a while, when his fingers drew across a mottled crack, he suddenly stopped. The dry and cracked bark appeared dark brown at his fingertips. Lu Qin raised his eyebrows and gently pressed down on it again. Gradually, a fine crack appeared in the dark bark. With the movement of his fingers, the crack continued to expand until it became a piece of bark the size of a palm. It suddenly shook and then fell from the tree trunk. With a clatter, the piece of bark gently fell to the ground. Lu Qin didn't take a closer look. He just stared at the exposed trunk behind the piece of bark. On the smooth wood, someone had used a sharp blade to carve out a simple but twisted pattern. There was a thick line and several thin lines of different lengths and thicknesses. At first glance, it looked like random graffiti. However, upon closer inspection, one would realize that when these twisted lines were put together, they looked like a tree. Big tree. The corners of Lu Chen's mouth slowly curled into a smile. He stared closely at the incomparably secretive pattern, as if he wanted to commit it to memory. After a while, he flipped his right hand and a black dagger appeared in his hand. Then, a black light flashed, and with a slash, he directly chopped off the piece of wood with the pattern carved on it. Then he turned around and called out to Atsu. He quickly walked out of the forest without looking back. When Lu Qin returned to the Fian platform, he saw a pretty figure standing in front of him. At first, Lu Qin thought it was Su Qingjun, but he soon realized that something was wrong. When he took a few steps forward, he found that it was Exan. The black dog let out a happy bark and ran forward. Exan smiled and squatted down, hugged Atsu and patted it vigorously. Atsu also happily jumped around her. After a while, Lu Qin came up and said with a smile, Why did you come today? EXN touched Atsu's head, then stood up and said to Lu Chen with a smile, It's rare that I have time. I haven't seen you and Atsu for a long time, so I came to see you. Lu Chen said, It sounds like you've been very busy recently. EXN said, Isn't it so? Since my master came out of seclusion, people have been coming here one after another. As his only disciple, I'm very tired from receiving guests all day long. But those who are related to my master are all people of status, so I can't take it lightly. It's tiring. Lu Chen laughed and said, Don't complain. It's better than having no one to take care of you before. Yexian giggled. Lu Chen looked around and saw that the Fian platform was empty. The cave in the distance was not open, and the stone door was closed. He asked EXN, Did you not see your sister Su when you came here? EXN said, No, I just came here not long ago. Sister Su hasn't come out yet, so I didn't dare to disturb her. Lu Chen nodded and said, It's fine. Come sit with me. With that, he led EXN to the wooden house that he had built not long ago. After entering the wooden house, EXN looked around curiously. She saw that most of the house was made of wood, including the walls, tables, chairs, and beds. It was just that it had not been painted, so the whole house looked very rough, but at the same time, it exuded a natural fragrance of trees. Looking at EXIN's expression, Lu Chen said with a smile, What's wrong? You've never seen a house like this before, right? EXN nodded and said, Yes, it's really the first time I've seen it. Did you build this all by yourself, Brother Lu? Yes. That's amazing, EXN praised from the bottom of her heart. Lu Chen burst into laughter and pulled over a wooden chair for EXN to sit on. He said casually, I just chopped some wood and tied it together. It's nothing to be surprised about. EXN laughed and then suddenly seemed to think of something. Her face turned serious and a sly look flashed in her eyes. She said to Lu Chen seriously, Well, I came here today because I have another thing to inform you. So formal. Is it something important? Lu Chen asked curiously. EXN coughed and said, I can't call you Brother Lu anymore. What? Lu Chen asked. You see, EXN said seriously, Sister Su and I have always been on the same level. But now that you have become Sister Su's nominal disciple, you have to call her master, right? Then when you see me, do you have to call me martial uncle? Lu Chen was stunned for a moment and then he laughed and scolded, Well, now you actually know how to take advantage of me. EXN snorted and said, What advantage? If you dare not call Sister Su master, then I won't let you call me martial uncle. Lu Chen waved his hand and said, What are you talking about? Su Qingjun is younger than me by a few years. How can I call her master? No way, no way. EXN laughed and said, You can say that behind my back. When Sister Su really comes, let's see if you dare to admit it. Lu Chen said righteously, A man won't call her master if I say I won't. Your threats are useless. EXN covered her mouth and giggled. She looked very happy. Looking at her appearance, Lu Chen also felt that his mood seemed to be a lot better. He smiled and said to her, Didn't you say you were very busy? Why are you free today? Oh, my master went out to meet an old friend today, so I am free. EXN stretched and then leaned on the rough bed without any taboo. With a satisfied smile, she said, It's still more comfortable here, Brother Lu. You don't know that in the Threejiang Peak Cave residence, my face is sore from smiling all day long. Those people I know and don't know have to greet me with a smile. It's really 10 times more tiring than cultivating. Lu Chen jokingly scolded, You really don't know how lucky you are. Still, it's quite annoying to see so many people every day. In the future, you can come over to my place to play whenever you're free. When I'm not around, you can chat with that big sister of yours. EXN shrugged and said, It's fine if I want to chat with you. It won't disturb you. But Sister Su is a genius who is the focus of attention. She must seize the time to cultivate all day long. I don't dare to disturb her. Lu Chen thought for a moment and said, Well, in fact it's not completely like that. Your sister Su sometimes likes to have someone to chat with. Anyway, it's not a bad thing for you to be close to her. Lu Chen said with a smile, It's just eso. You know Sister Su quite well now. Lu Chen said with a smile, It's just eso. By the way, there are so many immortals and big shots on this mountain. Who is your master going to visit? EXN said, My master didn't tell me. He just said goodbye to me and left. He usually tells me where he's going. Probably thinking of this difference, EXN was a little depressed. Lu Chen saw that this girl's mood was so easily fluctuating and found it funny. He casually said some jokes and in the blink of an eye he made EXN happy. The two chatted and laughed for a while. Seeing that it was getting late, Exine got up and said goodbye. Lu Chen saw her to the side of the mountain road and watched her go. But after a while Exine suddenly turned back and said to Lu Chen, "Brother Lu, there is something I want to tell you." Lu Chen saw that her expression was a little serious and didn't seem to be joking. He was a little surprised and said, "What's wrong?" Exine said, "Before my master went out this time, someone came to visit him. It was He Shixiang." Lu Chen's face sank and said, "He Gang's big brother?" "Yes." Lu Chen could understand why Exine's face didn't look too good at the moment. After all, He Gang's matter was like a nightmare to her. It was a past that she really didn't want to recall. And He was He Gang's big brother. He Gang was directly driven out of Kunlun Mountain because of that matter. No matter how he looked at it, he and Exine were like fire and water. And Exine was Dongfang Tao's only disciple. Obviously Dongfang Tao and He couldn't go together. But this matter happened like this. There was obviously something strange in it. Lu Chen thought for a moment and said, "What did they say that day? Did you hear it?" Exine thought for a moment and said, "I was at the side most of the time, but they said some polite words, nothing important. Later, when they were almost finished, I packed up the tea set and left for a while. I saw the two of them say a few more words, but I didn't hear the rest." Lu Chen frowned and didn't say anything for a moment. Exine looked a little worried. She was full of thoughts and said in a low voice, "Brother Lu, what do you think they talked about? My master, he couldn't have been moved by Shixiang He, right?" Lu Chen looked at the young girl and sighed in his heart. Exine's good days today could be said to be almost entirely due to her receiving Dongfang Tao's appreciation. Dongfang Tao also unexpectedly broke through the great life and death juncture and became enlightened Yuanying. If Dongfang Tao was bewitched by He and had some opinions about Exine, then it could be said to be a disaster for her. No wonder she was not calm at all. Lu Chen thought for a moment and said to Exine, "Exine, don't be anxious. In my opinion, this matter shouldn't be as bad as you think." He paused for a moment and said, "If you are still worried, I will think of a way to help you find out about He's recent movements." "Yes." Exine nodded heavily, a trace of a smile on her face. Although she knew that He Shixiang and Lu Chen's cultivation and strength were worlds apart, but for some reason when Lu Chen said he would help her, Exine almost unconsciously believed him. What he said he would definitely be able to do. Exine thought like this and her mood immediately improved. Chapter 179. "I'll go down the mountain tomorrow," Lu Chen said to Su Qingjun, who was standing not far away as he sat on the ridge of the field with his back against a big tree. It was already dusk. Su Qingjun had stayed in the cave for a day and would come out to walk around at this time. It was a relatively fixed habit for her these days. Lu Chen didn't know if she had this habit when she lived alone on the Fian Terrace, but under normal circumstances, dusk was a fixed time for him to chat with this woman. Most of the time it was relatively relaxing. Speaking of which, perhaps it was because she had made a big fuss when she returned to the Su family a while ago, which frightened the family. So these days the Fian Terrace was unusually quiet. Often no one came up for a few days. Occasionally some people came over, but they were some friends of Su Qingjun from the Kunlun party. No one from the Su family came. Su Qingjun didn't have much of a reaction to this, at least in front of Lu Chen. These days she looked very calm, but no one knew what this woman was thinking in the depths of her heart. Lu Chen wouldn't ask anything. After Su Qingjun made a big fuss in the Su family and returned to the mountain, the two of them quickly stopped talking about this matter. But compared to before, their relationship was undoubtedly much closer. Even Su Qingjun could joke with Lu Chen more casually in private. At this moment, Su Qingjun smiled and asked Lu Chen, "What are you going to do? I see that you're very free recently. How about growing more spiritual herbs in the spiritual field?" Lu Chen laughed and said, "I'm going to go down the mountain for a walk. In addition, I know some small things that you definitely haven't seen before. I'll bring some back for you to broaden your horizons." Su Qingjun was only joking at first, but her curiosity was piqued after hearing Lu Chen's explanation. She asked, "What is it? It sounds very interesting." Lu Chen smiled and said, "You'll know when I bring it back. I'll come to see you tomorrow night." "Okay." The next morning Lu Chen got up and went down the mountain with the black dog. Now that he was a nominal disciple of Jin Dan Friar, his identity was different. He was no longer as embarrassed as before. Dogs were valued by their owners. Recently, Atsu could also follow Lu Chen to wander around openly, ignoring the original rule of the Kunlun party that no one could keep a dog casually. The dog raised by the disciple of the genius Jindan, how could it be an ordinary dog? On the way down the mountain and into Kunwa City, Lu Qin didn't rush to find old Ma in the secluded alley. Instead, he took Atsu to wander around the street. Along the way he bought a lot of meat and bones for Atsu. He put them in a bag and carried them all the way to Black Hill Pavilion to feed Atsu. This made Atsu greedy. Along the way, it drooled and stared at the bag in Lu Chen's hand. It couldn't see anything else. Then Lu Chen wandered around the street for a while and bought a few things before he took Atsu back to Black Hill Pavilion. After entering the house and going to the small courtyard in the back, Lu Chen scattered the meat and bones on the ground in a corner. Atsu immediately roared and rushed over to pounce on the food like a fierce dog, chewing loudly. At the side, old Ma was amused and said with a smile, "This guy must have been starving on the mountain. Why is he eating like this? It's like he hasn't eaten anything in 8 lifetimes." Lu Chen chuckled and said, "It's living a very comfortable life, so you don't need to worry about it. How about I leave it with you and you take care of it?" Old Ma immediately waved his hand and said, "Forget it. Pretend I didn't say anything. I can't afford to take care of this dog." The two of them sat facing each other. Old Ma looked at him and said, "It hasn't been long since you went down the mountain. Why did you come back? Besides, there are many people from the Su family in this city. Aren't you afraid of another accident?" Lu Chen smiled and said, "The Su family won't dare to court disaster again. It's fine." Old Ma said with a smile, "You sound so sure. It seems you have a card up your sleeve." Lu Chen snorted and said, "In any case, the Su family is an old aristocratic family that has been entrenched in Kunwa City for many years. There must be a few people in the family who understand the situation. With the current situation, anyone with the slightest bit of knowledge knows that the Su family will rely on Su Qingjun the most in the future. Not everyone is as stupid as those wastes in that Madame Bai." Old Ma nodded and said, "You're right. If I were a member of the Su family, the most important thing right now would be to ease the relationship with eldest Miss Su as soon as possible and use their blood relationship to move her. The more we do, the more mistakes we'll make. It'd be best if we didn't do anything." There was some regret on Lu Chen's face. He said, "That's right. I originally thought I'd draw out a few more wastes today and see if I could use this opportunity to stir up trouble and sow discord between Su Qingjun and that family. Unfortunately, there really are people with discerning eyes. I wasted my time walking around the streets." Old Ma sneered and said, "You're too evil. You want to destroy the Su family from the root." Lu Chen sneered but didn't say anything. "Right, there's one more thing. If you have time, can you help me pay attention to He Yi's recent movements and see if there's anything strange?" Lu Chen said to Old Ma. Old Ma frowned and his eyes seemed to suddenly look a little strange. He looked at Lu Chen and asked, "Why are you suddenly concerned about this person?" Lu Chen didn't hide it and casually repeated what Xin had said to him. In the end he said, "I've always felt that this He Yi is a little strange. Last time he was clearly forced into seclusion, but after a period of time he was suddenly released for no reason. It seems that he's been wandering around the Kunlun party recently and seems to be meeting people everywhere." Old Ma's eyes flashed and he didn't say anything. Lu Chen noticed his expression and said, "What's wrong?" Old Ma looked at him meaningfully and said, "You're right. He is indeed strange. Do you remember I told you last time that someone was investigating the matter of the cinnabar?" "I remember. What did you find?" Lu Chen asked. Old Ma laughed coldly and said, "The person who was investigating was He Gang." Lu Chen's expression changed slightly and he sat up a little straighter. After thinking for a moment, he suddenly said, "But you said before that the person who investigated this matter showed a token of the Kunlun party to some big shops?" "That's right." Lu Chen's eyes slowly lit up and he said, "But He Gang has clearly been chased out of the sect by the Kunlun party?" "That's right." Old Ma had a faint smile on his face and said, "In other words, he shouldn't have this kind of thing." Lu Chen looked at Old Ma and said slowly, "But he has it and showed it to others. The person who could give him this kind of token. It can only be He Yi." Lu Chen fell silent and a thoughtful expression appeared on his face as if he had thought of more things. After a moment he said in a low voice, "In other words, the person who wanted to investigate the cinnabar matter was He Yi himself. It was just that he couldn't do it himself, so he sent He Gang to do it." Old Ma nodded and said, "That's right. He Gang did this secretly. It took me a lot of effort to confirm that it was him." Lu Chen's eyes grew brighter and brighter as he said in a low voice, "The cinnabar is usually not important, but recently it is related to a murder case of the Devil's Sect on the Kunlun Mountain. He suddenly came out of seclusion and intervened in this matter, So the reason why he was suddenly released? The corner of his mouth slowly showed a hint of a smile, but it was not gentle and carried a hint of coldness. After looking at Old Ma pointed a finger at him with an indifferent expression. He's coming for you. I didn't expect that there would be someone secretly pursuing me on the Kunlun mountain. This feeling. Luchin clicked his tongue. Old Ma squinted at him and said, "What's so strange about it? Haven't you been like this for so many years? You should be used to it, right?" "Well, you're right." Luchin nodded and said, "But since we know this person's purpose, it's all the more important that we investigate him." He looked at Old Ma. Old Ma nodded and said, "Don't worry, leave it to me." Good. After saying these words, both of them breathed a sigh of relief at the same time. At the same time, there was a faint hint of excitement on their faces. For the shadow hiding in the dark, discovering such a secret might have a different feeling. "Hey, I see that you're in good spirits recently," Old Ma said to Luchin with a smile. Luchin said, "Yes, I'm busy with revenge. There are so many debts to collect. If I don't be in good spirits, how can I finish it?" Old Ma glanced at him and said, "No, I feel that you're not the same as before. When you were a shadow, you always looked bitter and hateful all day, as if you would turn hostile and kill people at the slightest disagreement. But it's different now." Luchin was startled and said, "What do you mean by that?" Old Ma stared at him and said, "These days, I always feel that you seem to be more cheerful than before. Has your temperament changed? Or is there someone on the Kunlun mountain that made your mood better?" Luchin was silent for a moment. Suddenly, a strange light flashed in the depths of his eyes. Then he suddenly laughed and scolded Old Ma with a smile. "Bullsh*t. I'm a shadow and there are thousands of incarnations. How can you see through me? How do you know that what I showed you before wasn't fake and that what you see now is real?" Old Ma nodded and said, "Well, what you said makes sense. Sometimes I really can't see through you. But look at yourself. Aren't you tired of living like this?" He smiled and said to Luchin, "There's only the two of us here. Just relax. Otherwise, if you keep pretending, I'm afraid that you'll go crazy in the future." "Go to hell. I won't go crazy even if you go crazy," Luchin scolded. Old Ma laughed and walked to the side to tease Atsu, who was still eating. Luchin looked at his back and the smile on his face gradually faded. Chapter 180. On the way back to the mountain, he brought Atsu, whose belly seemed to have grown bigger and had almost swallowed all the meat and bones, back to the mountain. Along the way he could only hear the dog's burps. The weather was clear in the afternoon. The scenery in Kunlun Mountain was quiet and beautiful. The forest was green and the trees were undulating. Occasionally, one or two waterfalls could be seen, making people walking on the mountain road feel like they were in a fairyland. In the blessed land of Spirited Mountain, spirit chi seemed to be everywhere. There were not many people on the mountain road. Because this place was within the mountain gate of Kunlun Mountain, all one could see were Kunlun disciples. There were all kinds of people, but almost all of them were chi refining and foundation establishment disciples. After all, most of the odd job disciples had a lot of things to do, so it was impossible for them to be so leisurely. Therefore, in comparison, Luchin was a bit conspicuous. Fortunately, there were not many people. Secondly, most of the cultivators were too lazy to meddle in other people's business, so no one paid attention to him. After walking like this for a while, Luchin suddenly saw a person walking on the opposite mountain road in front of him. Several people in the same direction in front of Luchin, whether they were foundation establishment disciples or chi refining disciples, after seeing that person, almost all of them immediately nodded and smiled to greet him. In the voice that floated with the wind, he could also clearly hear the words, "Senior brother He," and so on. Luchin's footsteps stopped. He looked ahead and watched the person get closer. Gradually he could see that handsome and determined face clearly. After a moment he stood on the side of the road with his head slightly bowed. When that person passed by him, he calmly called out like the others, "Senior brother He." When passing by Luchin, He's footsteps slightly slowed down. He turned his head to look at the inconspicuous odd job disciple standing on the side of the road. He nodded to him and then continued to walk forward. A wind blew from the forest and made a small whirl between the two of them. It blew up a fallen leaf, floated up and fell down, rolling and floating into the distance. Peace returned to the mountain path. Luchin stood where he was for a while. When the other Kunlun disciples had gone far away, only the black dog was still squatting beside him. Luchin glanced at Atsu and suddenly said, "Since we've met and we have nothing to do anyway, why don't we go and take a look?" Atsu tilted his head, looking a little confused. Lu Qin turned around and walked in another direction. He had walked this path before, but now he was far away. However, Lu Qin was not in a hurry to catch up. Instead, he walked slowly. By his side, Atu was running a few steps in front of him. He sniffed the ground lightly and then jogged forward. Just like that, Lu Qin followed Atsu, walking and walking. After walking for a long time, looking at the surrounding mountain terrain, Lu Qin suddenly frowned. This was because the mountain path in this direction was getting more and more desolate, and there were no signs of accommodation. As they went deeper, even human footprints became rare. Weeds began to appear on the road, exuding a desolate aura. After walking for a while, with Atsu's unusually sensitive nose leading the way, Lu Qin had walked a long distance on this secluded mountain path. Then he suddenly saw the nameless mountain in front of him, hidden under the tall mountain range, mostly shrouded in shadows. Although it was very far away, a very strong gloomy aura still came over. Lu Qin's expression changed slightly, then he looked forward. In the distance, he could only vaguely see a blurry back of He, who seemed to be walking alone into the dark side of the nameless mountain. There was a condensed darkness there, as if it had swallowed He's figure in an instant, and nothing else could be seen. Lu Qin glanced at the mountain terrain on his left and right, and finally, his eyes fell on the nameless mountain. After a while, he muttered to himself, "I didn't expect there to be such a dark place in the mountains of Kunlun. It shouldn't be." He looked a little surprised and a little confused, but he quickly calmed down again, ready to take a step forward. But before he took a step forward, he suddenly thought of something and looked back at Atsu. The black dog was sitting quietly on the ground behind him, and when Lu Qin looked over, it even wagged its tail gently. Lu Qin pondered for a moment, walked over, squatted down and patted Atsu's head, saying, "There should be some bad things in the field in front, don't go there." It was not clear if Atsu understood him, but it just looked up at Lu Qin, barked twice, and then stuck out its tongue to lick Lu Qin's palm. Lu Qin smiled, and his smile seemed to be the most gentle of the day. He reached out and hugged Atu's head, then patted its head and said in a low voice, "Go and play by yourself. Wait for me here, or when it gets dark, go to the Flying Goose Terrace to sleep. Do you understand?" Atsu barked, then got up and walked to the side of the mountain path, looking back at Lu Qin from time to time. Lu Qin smiled at it, and waited until Atsu ran into the forest next to the mountain and disappeared before he slowly turned around and looked at the darkness behind the mountain again, a silent look on his face again. After a moment, he walked forward quietly until he reached the edge of the darkness, and then, like a drop of water falling into the sea, his figure disappeared into the depths of the darkness without any movement. Atsu ran and played in the forest, breathing the fresh air, jumping up and down, sometimes beating the birds, sometimes digging holes in the ground, playing very freely, and seemed to have forgotten its owner. Unknowingly, it had walked a long way in the forest, and came to a small valley in the forest that was sunken and covered with white granite. Atsu was a dog, and for a long time, it was only interested in food, and didn't care much about other things like stones and trees. It had the same reaction to this white stone valley, and slowly walked past the side of the valley, looking like it was going to continue running forward. But at this moment, a beautiful little girl's face suddenly appeared on the largest white rock in the valley. She looked at Atsu and suddenly smiled, then lay on the largest rock, waved at Atsu and shouted, "Come here." When Atsu turned his head to look, he saw a little girl of about 10 years of age. Although she was young, her temperament was different from others. Now, there was a faint aura of superiority about her. This beautiful girl was, of course, White Lotus. Atsu stood where he was, looking a little surprised but also a little wary. It seemed surprised to see White Lotus in this remote corner, but it didn't seem to lower its guard. However, White Lotus didn't seem to hate this black dog. Instead, she waved at Atsu and said with a smile, "Stupid dog, why don't you come over?" Atsu hesitated for a moment, but still slowly walked over. As Atsu approached, the smile on White Lotus's face was first shocked, then slowly disappeared and her face became a little gloomy. She saw the wounds on Atsu's body as well as the missing eye and half of its tail. Everything seemed to tell her that something terrible had happened to this dog. Atsu slowly walked to the bottom of the huge rock, then raised his head to look at White Lotus. In a flash, White Lotus slowly fell from the top of the rock, landing not far from Atsu. What happened? White Lotus looked at Atsu's appearance, frowned and asked Atsu. Atsu responded with a bark, but it seemed that no one could understand it. This made Atsu look a little depressed and disappointed. However, White Lotus's eyes fell on the terrible wounds on Atsu's body again and murmured, "It seems that the blood of the Sirius in your body is very good. You can still survive after being tortured like this. She slowly squatted in front of Atsu, and Atsu instinctively took a step back. From the beginning to the end, Atsu looked at White Lotus with a trace of fear and wariness. Something's not right. Suddenly, White Lotus opened her mouth. She stared at Atsu as if she had found something strange. After pondering for a while, she suddenly said in a low voice, "How is it possible? It seems there is the smell of blood food." She reached out a hand and slowly placed it on Atsu's head. Atsu's body was a little tense, but it still obediently lay on the ground, showing a submissive posture. White Lotus seemed to be very satisfied with this, and she had no intention of making things difficult for Atsu. Her expression was focused on thinking, and after a while she said to herself, "On this mountain of Kunlun, there is actually a second person who knows the secret method of blood food? Who is that person?" She lowered her head, stared at Atsu's eyes and suddenly asked. Her voice sounded a little cold, but Atsu suddenly stood up from the ground after a moment of silence. It looked at White Lotus and suddenly let out a low growl from its throat. It was like a ferocious beast that had been provoked and angered, and it slowly bared its snow-white fangs at White Lotus. White Lotus looked at Atsu's actions and suddenly smiled. Beasts will be beasts. No matter how talented they are, aren't they still stupid? I know this person. She reached out her hand and patted Atsu's head. Atsu turned its head to the side, wanting to dodge, but it only felt its vision blur. White Lotus's palm still touched its head, and it happened to press down on its head. White Lotus's brows relaxed and she gently flicked her fingers. Gradually, white smoke floated out from between her fingers. It carried a strong chill, and it evaporated in the air like the coldest ice cube. Snow Wind Sutra. This was the unique secret method of the Kunlun party's Dong Feng, the soul formation perfected Lord Bai Chen. Atsu seemed to have sensed something, and it immediately lay down, not daring to move recklessly. White Lotus smiled, nodded, and said, "It seems that you are still smart. Is this also the serious bloodline? But I'm a little curious. Why didn't the secret method of blood food make you, a beast, go crazy? This doesn't seem reasonable. Let me take a closer look." Chapter 181. The back of the nameless mountain had always been dark, even during the day. After Lu Chen walked into the darkness, he felt that the surrounding temperature seemed to have suddenly dropped a lot. At the same time, a gust of cold wind blew continuously from the front, as if the terrible palm of Ain spirit was caressing his flesh and skin. Lu Chen was not too surprised by this. This was just one of the common scenes in the shadowy land. For ordinary people it was terrifying. For ordinary cultivators, perhaps it was a little troublesome because it was rare, but for him, it was already a common sight. He seemed to have a natural ability to blend into the darkness. In this shadow, he was like a fish in the water, silently moving forward, not revealing any traces. Not long after, Lu Chen saw the black house. The black door was open at the moment, and He's figure could be vaguely seen standing in the courtyard. Lu Chen hid in a dark corner, looking over there for a while, and then his eyes fell on the plaque above the black door with the words "Righteous Grave." He frowned slightly. He could roughly guess what these two words meant, but he really did not think that there would be such a thing in the Kunlun party that seemed to only exist in the mortal world. And looking at the surroundings again, the Yin Qi was dense and the darkness was surging. Lu Chen quickly judged that the core of this Yin land should be in that courtyard. Righteous Grave, as the name suggested, should be a place where the dead would come. Ordinary people would not come here at all. Even for a shadow like Lu Chen who used to walk in the dark, he would not easily set foot in this kind of place. No one liked this place, or rather, as long as it was a living creature, it would not like this kind of dense Yin Qi place. Therefore, since ancient times, the Yin land was one of the dangerous places. Then there was only one question left: what was He doing here? If there were no other accidents, Lu Chen would probably have thought of an answer in his heart. He stood in a dark corner and quietly looked at the black courtyard. He thought to himself, so He Changxing's body was placed here after he died? Just as he was deep in thought, a cold aura suddenly floated out from the courtyard, like a venomous snake hiding in the darkness suddenly spitting out its tongue, like a sleeping evil spirit suddenly opening its eyes. A skinny figure walked out from the darkness, silently appearing behind He, standing in front of the black door. A bone-chilling wind suddenly blew. His cold gaze swept through the darkness. He looked at the shadowy corner. The cold wind swept over, blowing up a few withered leaves. In the darkness, there seemed to be a storm and undercurrent surging. However, after a while, only a few withered leaves fluttered in the sky and then slowly floated down. There was nothing in that dark corner. Other than darkness, it was as if nothing had ever existed. The zombie's cold gaze swept over the place. When he saw the empty and lonely darkness, a trace of extreme astonishment seemed to flash across the depth of his eyes. At this moment, a figure walked over and stood not far behind him. Was he? He too glanced outside but did not see anything. Hence, he frowned and asked the zombie, "Senior, what's wrong?" The zombie did not answer him. After a moment of silence, he suddenly asked, "Did you come to see me alone?" He nodded and said, "Yes." The zombie grunted and didn't say anything else. He turned around and walked back into the dark courtyard. The black gate behind him moved on its own without any wind and slowly closed up, hiding all the darkness and secrets behind it once again. The darkness outside the courtyard was as quiet as the deep sea. After an unknown period of time, in another dark corner not far from the corner, a slight tremor suddenly came from the ground. Then, as if the darkness was disintegrating, a figure slowly emerged from the darkness. It was Luchin. At the moment his face looked a little cold. When he looked at the courtyard again, his gaze was completely different from before. Atsu was lying on the ground, looking at White Lotus beside him with a vigilant gaze. The little girl, who had an otherworldly beauty, was showing a faint smile at the moment. Her fair, jade-like fingers were softly brushing over the black fur on Atsu's back. Specks of tiny, translucent, crystal-like white shards floated up and dispersed on her fingertips, forming a sharp contrast with Atsu's shiny black fur. Under the white and cold radiance, faint wisps of aura lightly touched Atsu's skin. Some bounced back and some seeped in. Gradually, the smile on White Lotus's face vanished. In its place was a doubtful expression, as if she had discovered something extremely strange that she did not expect. After a while, she stopped brushing her fingers, and the snow-like powder also disappeared. Atsu raised its head and glanced at her. Seeing that White Lotus did not seem to have any other strange expression, it inched forward a little and then crept up quietly. White Lotus saw all of Atsu's movements, but for some reason she did not stop it. In her bright and clear eyes, the figure of the black dog was reflected, but her gaze seemed to be looking further away. No, this is not the blood-feeding secret technique. Blood-feeding secret technique is so overbearing. Once the technique is cast, even if the body doesn't explode and die, it will at least end up in a frenzy. How could it still be like you? White Lotus stared at Atsu as if she had seen something unbelievable. She murmured, "But in this dog's body, there are clearly traces of blood feeding. What is going on? Could it be that in this world, there is another kind of technique that has the same origin as blood feeding, but is stronger than the blood feeding secret technique?" If this is the case, then the hundreds of thousands of lives that the southern barbarians have lost for thousands of years are just a big joke. White Lotus suddenly stood up. For some reason, her beautiful face was flushed with excitement as she stared at Atsu. Atsu was inexplicably afraid and took a step back. "Luchin." White Lotus chuckled softly. Her voice sounded a little erratic. She said, "Interesting, interesting. Luchin, who are you?" Luchin rushed back to Flying Goose Terrace before dusk. Atsu was delayed for a while. After he came out of the dark grave, he whistled for a while and Atsu ran back from the forest. On the way back, Atsu didn't seem to be in a very good mood, but other than that, there seemed to be nothing unusual. There was no pain or injury. Luchin was also thinking about the strange figure in the dark grave, so he didn't pay too much attention to Atsu. However, when walking on the mountain road of Flying Goose Terrace, both Luchin and Atsu seemed to have adjusted their emotions after walking for a while. Atsu began to run back and forth happily. Luchin also saw from afar a figure leisurely walking on Flying Goose Terrace in the light of the approaching dusk. For some reason, when he saw the quiet figure of the woman, Luchin felt a lot better. He smiled and waved at Su Qingjun from afar, calling out to her. When Su Qingjun heard his voice, she looked back and smiled. When dusk arrived, the golden sunlight spread over the vast sea of white clouds, dyeing the clouds as far as the eye could see a beautiful golden color. The black dog ran happily on the Flying Goose platform. The two of them stood on the flat ground by the cliff, their shadows forming a long shadow. "You're back," Su Qingjun said to Luchin. "You really went for a whole day." Luchin smiled and said, "Yes. The journey back and forth wasn't short. Plus, I went to many places in the city to buy a lot of things, so it was a little delayed. But at least I made it back in time." Su Qingjun glanced at the bag in his hand, and her eyes showed some curiosity. She said, "What is it? Why are you being so secretive?" Luchin chuckled and beckoned Su Qingjun to sit down beside a few rocks. He then took out something wrapped in paper from the bag he carried with him and handed it to her. Su Qingjun took it and felt a slight warmth in her palm. She glanced at Lu Qin, but Lu Qin smiled and did not say anything. He only gestured for her to open the paper and take a look. Su Qingjun stretched out her fingers and gently opened the paper. After lifting the 2 layers of thin paper, she saw what was inside. It was a small black ball, and at the same time, it gave off a strange smell of meat. A hint of surprise appeared on her face. She looked at Lu Qin and asked, "What is this?" "Roasted loach." Lu Qin said with a smile, "Try it, it's delicious." Su Qingjun was stunned and said, "This thing can be eaten?" "Yes." Lu Qin said, "Don't be fooled by its black color. In fact, it's crispy on the outside and tender on the inside, and the meat inside is very delicious. I've been craving this thing since I was a child. Unfortunately, I didn't have the money to buy it at that time, so I drooled when I saw it." Su Qingjun hesitated for a moment, and then frowned slightly. She said, "Loach is such a vulgar thing. It lives in dirty streams and it has no spiritual power. Eating it has no benefit for cultivation. Why should we eat it?" "There's no reason." Lu Qin shrugged and looked at Su Qingjun with a gentle and smiling expression. He said, "It's just for the sake of delicious food. I think you don't have to do everything for the sake of cultivation, right?" "Is that so?" Su Qingjun seemed to be a little confused but also somewhat moved. "Try it. It's a delicacy that only mortals and poor people can eat." Lu Qin looked at her and for some reason, a strange emotion flashed in his eyes. He then smiled and said, "Eating whatever you want, living whatever life you want, isn't that the best?" Su Qingjun smiled, looked at him and suddenly asked, "Then in your heart, do you want to live that kind of life?" "Of course, I really want to live a free life without being manipulated by others. I really want that." Lu Qin laughed. Chapter 182. That day, Su Qingjun tried the roasted loach out of curiosity. Unfortunately, she didn't get to taste the mouth-watering, lingering delicacy that Lu Qin mentioned. After frowning a few times, Su Qingjun put down these ugly and seemingly ordinary things. "It doesn't seem to be to my liking. I don't think it's that delicious," Su Qingjun said to Lu Qin, feeling a bit embarrassed. Lu Qin looked at her and smiled. He also picked up the other roasted loach and took a few bites. After a while, he spat it out on the ground and said, "And it really doesn't taste good." Su Qingjun said with a smile, "It's probably because you brought it all the way from Kunwa City to the mountain. It's such a long journey, so it's probably already cold. Also, it's not too fresh, so the taste is a bit bad. Next time we have a chance, we should find some freshly made roasted loach. Maybe it'll taste better." Lu Qin shook his head and said, "It has nothing to do with that. I remember when I was a kid, I occasionally ate this thing. Even if it was overnight, I still ate it until my mouth watered. This roasted loach didn't change, it was me who changed." On the edge of the cliff on Flying Goose Terrace, there was a moment of silence. The two of them didn't say anything. In the distance, the black dog's snorts could be heard. It seemed like it had run into the forest and caught something, so it was happily playing around. After a while, Su Qingjun smiled and said to Lu Qin, "In fact, isn't this a good thing? You've become a better person. It can't be that you want to go back to the bitter days you had when you were a kid, right?" Lu Qin smiled and nodded. "You're right. I've become a better person." He put away the snacks and said to Su Qingjun with a smile, "I wanted to let you eat something you've never eaten before to broaden your horizons and tease you. In the end, I messed it up. I'm so embarrassed. I've made a fool of myself in front of you." Su Qingjun hurriedly said, No. In fact, I'm also very happy because I've never eaten or even seen these things before." She seemed to be lost in thought as she spoke. Late at night, the Flying Goose Terrace was silent. Su Qingjun had already returned to her cave. At this moment, she looked at the stone wall and saw only a patch of moonlight shining on the smooth stone, reflecting the cold radiance. The wooden house where Lu Qin lived was on the other side of Flying Goose Terrace, and it was closer to the edge of the cliff. At this moment, the moonlight fell on the wooden house and shone through the open window. It was late at night, but Lu Qin was still awake. Atsu was lying by his feet, curled up into a ball and asleep. Ever since it was seriously injured, whenever Atsu slept, as long as Lu Qin was by his side, it would definitely snuggle up to him. Lu Qin tried to chase it off the bed a few times, but Atsu would cling to him tenaciously every time. In the end, Lu Qin let it be. The night was bleak and the moonlight was cold. He put his hand behind his head as a pillow. His eyes were bright as he stared at the moonlight outside the window. He always seemed to be like this. In the dark night, as long as he didn't sleep, he would be abnormally awake. The bright moon hung high in the night sky and was reflected in the depths of his eyes. It was like the shadow of the moon floating in the dark sea, faintly changing with a strange luster. Lucian looked at the bright moon. At this moment, the shape of the moon was no longer that of a full moon. Instead, it was slightly thinner. He calculated the time in his mind and then said to himself in a low voice, "There are still 24 days. In another 24 days, it would be the night of the next full moon." That day, in that mysterious forest, he found the mysterious pattern hidden under the bark of the tree, which revealed a code mark that only a few people in this world could understand. Meeting on the night of the full moon. That was the most simple meaning of it. It was an invitation from the depths of the darkness. Lucian understood it and received it. He didn't know whether it was good or bad, and he didn't know whether it was good or bad. All he could do was wait. Moreover, he didn't even tell old Ma about this matter. What would happen on the night of the next full moon? He silently looked at the moon. After a while, he suddenly got up and closed the window. On this day, he went down the mountain and went straight to Kunwa City to find the place where He Gang lived. The two brothers chatted in the room for a while. He Gang told his big brother about his harvest from the search for Zhu Sha. In the end, he said with a bit of shame, "Big brother, I'm really useless. I spent so much time and effort, but I still didn't find any suspicious people." He didn't look angry. He shook his head and said, "You don't need to think too much. This is all normal. The devil cult of the three realms has been opposing our righteous path's famous sects for many years and has been hunted down and annihilated countless times. If it wasn't for some dirty tricks, I'm afraid they would have been eliminated by our righteous path seniors long ago. It doesn't matter if you can't find them." He Gang carefully looked at him and said, "Big brother, from what you said, could it be that you have some harvest in other places? I'm just afraid that if this drags on for too long, your master and sect head will become a bit impatient." He said, "It doesn't matter. You don't need to worry about this. In fact, I've already told them about this matter. The devil cult spy who can do such a big thing this time must have an extremely high position in the devil cult, and his cultivation must also not be low. Therefore it can be imagined that he's hiding very deeply. It's very difficult to find him in a short time." Regarding this, the two masters both nodded. Moreover, on the surface they also pretended to gradually forget about this matter, but in fact they might be secretly trying to lure that scoundrel out again. "It'd be great if we could really catch that scoundrel," the gang said hatefully. He smiled and said, "Don't worry. The Kunlun party has several thousand years of history. It won't let these scoundrels act so easily. Sooner or later we'll catch them. At that time I'll help you plead with the two masters. In consideration of this contribution, maybe they can let you return to the Kunlun party." The gang's body trembled. His ugly face revealed a pleasantly surprised expression. He suddenly stood up and said, "Really? Big brother, is this true?" He sighed and said, "You're my only younger brother. Why would I lie to you?" The gang was overjoyed. He nodded repeatedly. For a moment he seemed to be so excited that he couldn't speak. It was easy to imagine how important the Kunlun party was in his heart. Ever since he was a child, ever since he was sensible, he followed his big brother into the Kunlun party. In his heart, Kunlun Mountain was his home. Apart from this, there was no other place. It was precisely because of this that when he was kicked out of the Kunlun party after that accident, He Gang was completely disheartened and almost died numbly. Fortunately, in this world he still had a big brother who loved him the most, Soon after, he chatted with He Gang for a while and repeatedly warned him to be careful in Kunwa City. At least, before this important event, he shouldn't stir up any more trouble. He Gang naturally agreed one by one. Soon after, he told He about what he had seen and heard in Kunwa City during this period of time. The most important part was the scene where the Su clan's matter changed. From what he said, He Gang was very contemptuous of Su Qingjun. He indirectly hinted to his big brother that this woman was fickle and wasn't a good match for him. As for Lu Qin, this kind of unpresentable part-time disciple, He Gang didn't even feel like saying his name for fear of polluting his big brother's ears. After listening to what He said, He shook his head and said, "Although my friendship with Su Qingjun isn't deep, I don't think she's that kind of person." Anxious, He Gang promptly said, "Big brother, I saw it with my own eyes." He interrupted him and said while shaking his head, "You didn't see anything. It's just that Su Qingjun went back to the Su family. I know what to do about this matter. But for us brothers, Su Qingjun is just a passerby who has nothing to do with us. We don't need to curry favor with the Su family, but we also don't need to provoke them. Do you understand?" After a moment of silence, He Gang nodded and said, "Okay." He looked at his younger brother and softened his voice. He said, "Xiaojing, I know you wholeheartedly want me to be well, but you don't have to be like this. We two brothers are actually the closest people in the world. To be honest, the only person I can trust with my life is you. I'll naturally deal with the other matters. You don't need to worry about me now. You just need to be yourself, okay?" He Gang nodded and said, "Yes, I understand, big brother. Don't worry." He smiled and patted He Gang's shoulder. He said, "When you return to Kunlun in the future, you and I will do great things together. The days ahead are still long. Who knows how far we can go in the future? Maybe we can even become the leader of Kunlun. Who knows?" He Gang laughed and nodded repeatedly. A trace of excitement flashed through his eyes. It was as if he was full of expectations and longing for the future. When he left, he did not make a sound. In order to not attract attention, he even changed into another set of clothes and covered his face. Then he left He Gang's house from another direction. However, after he gradually walked away, an honest-looking man who was pulling a cart suddenly walked out from a corner on the long street behind him. His blank and empty eyes looked in the direction that he had left. Then he turned around and walked in another direction. After about the time it took to drink a cup of tea, this man brought another person and stood in the same place. He first pointed at He Gang's house, then pointed at the long street that he had left from, and said a few words to him in a low voice. Standing beside him was a fat man. The fat man was Old Ma. Old Ma looked at the bustling street with people coming and going. He gently waved his hand. Then the unremarkable man who was pulling the cart beside him retreated. In the blink of an eye, he disappeared into the sea of people like a drop of water. Old Ma pursed his lips. He turned his head. His gaze seemed to be a little cold as he looked at the house. After a moment he suddenly smiled again. His smile was cold. Chapter 183. The stars moved, the moon set, and the sun rose. Time passed quietly, and after a few more days, there were still 21 days until the next full moon. That morning, when Lu Qin opened the door and walked out of the wooden house, he saw a figure that he had not expected at all standing outside the house. He could not help but be surprised and said, "Why are you here?" On the flat ground of the Flying Goose platform, White Lotus was standing there, looking at the beautiful scenery around her and said, "I did not expect this Flying Goose platform to have such scenery. It is really enviable. When will I be able to have such a cave abode?" Lu Qin snorted, walked over and stretched, then said, "Stop pretending. The strange peak you are on now is the real paradise, the immortal's secret realm. In the entire Kunlun party, only Yuanying Jinren has the right to set foot there. Would you care about a mere Flying Goose platform like this?" White Lotus smiled, and suddenly saw a black dog's head poking out from behind Lu Qin sneakily to look in their direction. White Lotus immediately laughed and waved to Atsu as if she was very happy and said, "Atsu, come here." Atsu looked at White Lotus and without a word shrank back, and hid in the room with its tail between its legs, without the slightest hesitation. White Lotus was stunned and looked a little awkward on the spot. After a moment she slowly put down her hand, then laughed dryly and said to Lu Qin, "This black dog does not seem to like me very much." Lu Qin also laughed and said, "Although Atsu is stupid, sometimes it will have a flash of inspiration." White Lotus stared at him and said, "Are you mocking me?" Lu Qin did not intend to answer her and only shrugged, then said, "Miss Bai, with your current status, I am afraid it is not appropriate for you to come to the Flying Goose platform so rashly, right?" Bai Lian said indifferently, "What's wrong with that? I don't think it's a big deal. Besides, although this is Su Qingjuan's residence, as long as I don't enter her residence, I can walk around the Flying Goose Terrace as I please. There's no way the Kunlun sect will forbid me from doing so." Of course, such a ban was impossible. The Flying Goose platform was beautiful, but it was really not a restricted area. It was just that most people in the sect respected Su Qingjun, so naturally they would not come here, so the Flying Goose platform became Su Qingjuan's private place. Of course, Lu Qin wouldn't argue with Bai Lian over this, so he simply waved his hand and said, "All right, don't waste your breath on me. Since you've come to the Soaring Goose Terrace, you must be looking for Su Qingjun, right? I will help you to call her." As he spoke, Lu Qin turned around, but a look of amusement flashed across his face. He thought to himself that it was still early. Once Su Qingjun was woken up, she would not be in a good mood. At that time there might be a good show to watch. Unexpectedly, White Lotus stopped Lu Qin and said, No need to go, I am not here to look for her, I am here to look for you. Lu Qin stopped in his tracks and after a soft sigh he turned around and looked at White Lotus. White Lotus looked at him with a smile that was not a smile, and there seemed to be some slyness in her expression. Lu Qin shook his head and walked over. At the same time he softened his voice and said with a bitter smile, I say, didn't we agree before that well water does not interfere with the river, water does not interfere with the well, water, water does not interfere with the river, water. You are now a noble disciple of a true monarch, and you also have a 5-pillar bone that is rarely seen in 1,000 years. With such a noble identity the entire Kunlun party has to coax and flatter you. You suddenly came to find a useless odd-job disciple like me, what do you want me to do? If someone knows something, I am afraid that there will be countless people coming to investigate me tomorrow. White Lotus laughed and said, Why, are you very afraid of being investigated? Lu Qin asked in reply, Then are you afraid? White Lotus did not speak. After a while Lu Qin said, So, it is better for us not to have any contact. You live your good life and I will drag out my life to be my odd-job disciple. Isn't that good for both of us? White Lotus looked at him and said, Originally I also thought so. I have never been bothered to care about your matters. But there is one thing that I must ask you clearly. Lu Qin frowned and said, What is it? White Lotus stared at his eyes and said, Do you know the blood-feeding technique that is passed down among the shamans of the southern barbarian tribes? Lu Qin was startled and then his eyebrows relaxed. It seemed that he had thought of many things in an instant, and also figured out the reason for White Lotus's sudden visit today. But on the surface he still shook his head and then replied with abnormal firmness, I don't know. White Lotus pointed to the wooden house and said, But I feel the traces of the blood-feeding technique from that dog. Lu Qin almost did not have the slightest hesitation and directly said, You are wrong. White Lotus looked at Lu Qin for a long time and after a while suddenly smiled and said, I feel that you are becoming more and more interesting. It seems that you are hiding more secrets than me. Lu Qin's eyes flashed and said with a smile, If that is the case, how about we make a deal? What do you say? White Lotus' face that seemed to be innocent and flawless at this moment, looked like the smartest and cunning fox in the world. Lu Qin said, Secrets for secrets. You tell me a secret and I will tell you a secret. This way everyone will be comfortable, how about it? White Lotus thought for a while and said, I don't feel too good. You look honest and sincere but in fact you are full of evil tricks. I don't trust you. Lu Qin sneered and said, Hey, I am not familiar with you so don't randomly accuse me. White Lotus smiled and said, Others can't see it but how can I not know? In the past you lied to that Exine girl and now you are going to lie to this Su Qingjun, right? Lu Qin laughed and said, Your ability to accuse others is not bad. Could it be a powerful method that Hakushin Jinkuan taught you? White Lotus pointed at Lu Qin's chest and said with a smile, You know in your heart that what I said is true. Otherwise, do you dare to swear that you have never lied to those 2 girls? After a pause she said thoughtfully and said, You are so treacherous. I feel that it is too dangerous to do business with you. I can't do it. Lu Qin laughed heartily but his eyes looked a little cold. White Lotus came just like that, and after chatting with Lu Qin for a while she left. Just as she said, she had no interest in Su Qingjun. It was just that the seemingly young girl, even after she left, still made Lu Qin frown and ponder for a long time. To be honest, he had seen many people in Kunlun, but the one who gave him the greatest pressure was not those powerful Jinren, but this little girl who was hiding in the shadows. On her body, there seemed to be countless secrets hidden in the darkness. Could it be that White Lotus was an evil sect spy? Lu Qin looked at White Lotus's receding figure, suddenly thought of this question and then gave himself a fright. Recalling all the information that he knew about White Lotus, he thought about it and still felt that this little girl might be rebellious, might have a lot of secrets, but at such a young age she was already shouldering a heavy responsibility. To enter a prestigious sect like Kunlun Party as a spy, she could not make any big mistakes. This kind of thing did not seem to be something that a little girl could do, even if White Lotus looked young and mature, even if her talent was so outstanding. If it was possible, Lu Qin did not want to pay attention to White Lotus at all. He was just an ordinary odd-job disciple, and there was a world of difference between him and White Lotus. On the contrary, if the news that White Lotus was paying attention to him spread, it was equivalent to the entire Kunlun party starting to pay attention to him. This kind of situation for a shadow was simply a situation of absolute death. But if she was not a spy of the devil cult, how could Bai Lian's secret be explained? How could a little girl be able to display the secret sorcery of the southern barbarians? she was just a little girl. Everything seemed to be getting more and more confusing. After discovering that White Lotus had come to Flying Goose platform, Atsu had been obediently staying in the wooden house and had no intention of going out. It seemed that they were particularly afraid of the little girl. It was only after White Lotus had left that Atsu seemed to suddenly breathe a sigh of relief, and its whole body relaxed. Luchin walked back to the wooden house and looked at Atsu. His eyes flickered slightly as if he was lost in thought. For the rest of the day, it returned to its original peaceful state. Luchin did his own work, and then at dusk Su Qingjun came out for a walk. The two of them stood by the cliff for a while, chatting, and then before the sky turned dark, they each said their goodbyes and returned to their own houses and caves. The night was very dark, there were no stars or moon, only the cold wind blowing coldly, as if it was the so-called dark and windy night. Luchin sat quietly in front of the window, looking at the dark sky amidst the rustling pines until midnight. It was already late at night, everything on earth seemed to have fallen asleep, even the mountains had fallen into a deep slumber. In the wooden house, Atsu curled up at his feet, sleeping quietly, looking exceptionally at ease. Luchin quietly stood up, his whole body suddenly slanted. He did not even open the wooden door and just strangely slid out of the window, and then turned over and closed the window. Under the night sky, he blended into the darkness, drifting away into the distance. That mysterious evil sect spy had left a mysterious symbol on the big tree in that forest, although Luchin could understand it and guessed that it meant to meet on the night of the next full moon, but before that he would not let go of other suspicious clues. Perhaps that symbol was just a trap with ulterior motives? Luchin, in his many years as a shadow, had long learned the instinct to not trust anyone. So when there were other suspicious points he would not easily let it go. For example, that dark and mysterious righteous grave. Chapter 184. Before that day, Luchin had never known about this strange and mysterious place in Kunlun Mountain. Sometimes when he thought about it he felt that the martyr's grave really was a very strange place. In a famous sect like the Kunlun Party this kind of secular thing should not exist, but it did, and it seemed to have a very long history. In the past, Luchin had never heard a word or two about the martyr's grave from anyone. It seemed that everyone had ignored this place, just like the dusky shadow that always shrouded the area around the martyr's grave. The martyr's grave had always been out of people's sight. People did not know about it, but it had always existed. In fact, there were many similar things in the world. There were many people and things that we had never seen or heard of, so we thought that it was impossible. Even if we accidentally discovered something, we would certainly use our own imagination to speculate what that thing looked like. Of course, Luchin would not be like this. Compared to the vast majority of cultivators in the cultivation world, the current him might be weak on the surface, but his experience and knowledge after seeing too many people and things had long made him understand this truth. He was indeed surprised by the sudden appearance of the martyr's grave, but what he should do was not speculate but carefully investigate. Abnormalities were demons, and the martyr's grave in Kunlun Mountain really seemed a bit too strange and abrupt. However, if it was really just a place that took in ownerless corpses, even if he had some doubts he might not necessarily take the risk. The most important reason why he sneaked into the nameless mountain this night was of course because he saw Heir come here that day. Heir, this person, was now like a venomous snake hiding in the darkness, coldly and desperately searching for the whereabouts of the murderer. And coming to the martyr's grave must also be because he seemed to have discovered something here. What exactly did he obtain from the martyr's grave? Luchin was determined to get to the bottom of this. The Shadow's patience was certainly unquestionable, but no one could question the Shadow's ability to act. It was just like the battle in the desolate valley 10 years ago. No one had ever given him an order and no one had ever told him what to do. However, at the most dangerous and critical moment, he had still acted decisively. His figure quickly moved forward in the darkness, but for some reason, perhaps because the night wind was too cold, he suddenly felt a chill in his chest. In the blink of an eye, it had been 10 years since he last saw her. That once beautiful face, along with the passage of time, seemed to be like all the memories in the world, gradually becoming blurry in his memory. The only thing that was still clearly engraved in his heart was her name. The curfew of the Kunlun Party was an ancient rule. No one knew how many years it had lasted, including all the Yuanying Jinren. This rule had existed since the first time everyone climbed the Kunlun Mountain. Perhaps it was really decided by Kuan Yuanzi and Tai Luo? But what was the point of setting a curfew? Luchin did not know. In fact, during his days on the Kunlun Mountain when night fell completely, He had secretly left his house several times and moved stealthily in the darkness. It was also because of this that he felt particularly confused about the curfew on the Kunlun mountain. Every time he sneaked out late at night, almost all the places he passed by at night on the Kunlun mountain did not have any thieves. Everyone was in awe of the Kunlun party. He had walked many times on those lonely mountain paths at night. But nothing had happened, and there was nothing strange or incomprehensible. The night in the Kunlun mountain was no different from the night in other places. Perhaps there was something strange about the occasional patrolling disciple? Then wasn't this curfew the most stupid rule? But all the disciples of the Kunlun sect still passed down this rule from generation to generation. It was not easy for Lu Qin to understand this, but he could shut his mouth and think about the era of the two patriarchs thousands of years ago. Every time it was late at night on the Kunlun mountain, some strange existences would run out and threaten the lives of the disciples of the sect. But now, thousands of years later, those dangers seemed to have disappeared without a trace. Or maybe they were just sealed and suppressed in the most mysterious, heaviest and tightest place under the Kunlun mountain. Lu Qin, who was stealthily moving in the darkness, suddenly stopped. He stood in the shadows and frowned as if he was thinking about something carefully. After a while he suddenly turned around and looked into the distance. That direction was the deepest part of the Kunlun mountain range. There was also a legendary forbidden area there, which was the foundation of the Kunlun party. Even spiritual master Yuanyin could not easily approach it. The only people who could control that dark area were the two peerless deity-stage deity. Lu Qin's eyes gradually lit up. For a long time, everyone had been guessing what was in the forbidden area in the sky. This time it seemed that Lu Qin had also thought of this. Lu Qin did not know what the evil sect spy saw in the Kunlun party, so it was very difficult to trace this person. But at this moment he suddenly had a feeling that the spy came for a certain secret. And the biggest secret of the Kunlun mountain was probably what was in that forbidden area? One had to walk step by step, rice had to be eaten bite by bite. Even if there was a new suspicion in his heart, Lu Qin still came to the martyr's grave again. There was an extremely resourceful corpse watcher here. During the day, Lu Qin had already sensed that this person's skills were extraordinary, and he had actually almost found him. The reason why he insisted on coming to this unpleasant place was probably because he wanted to get some information from the corpse watcher. In the dark night, the martyr's grave seemed to be darker than during the day. There was a feeling of not being able to see the fingers of one's hand. The black courtyard was like a giant beast, silently lying in this boundless darkness. Lu Qin waited in the darkness for a long time and then slowly approached. But until he was near the tightly shut door, there was no movement in the black courtyard. Lu Qin was hesitating whether he should investigate further or not. Suddenly, a gust of cold wind blew past. The black door not far in front of him suddenly opened by itself. A candle lit up. It was the withered corpse watcher who suddenly came to the side of the door, holding a candle in his left hand. With the help of the flame, Lu Qin clearly saw this person's expression. He seemed to be a little cold and had no intention of talking to anyone. After looking around, he suddenly said faintly, "Please show yourself, esteemed guest. If there's nothing else, then I'll be going back to sleep." Lu Qin quietly watched the corpse's figure, hiding in the darkness. He did not say a word, even his breathing was quiet. The corpse watcher waited for a while, then turned around and walked back into the courtyard. The black door behind him closed with a creak. Lu Qin looked down at his own body. He did not find anything unusual, but he could not understand why he had fallen for this a few times in the past 2 days. The corpse watcher seemed to always be able to notice something was wrong in advance, but it seemed like he could not really pinpoint the enemy, so it was a little awkward. So now, should he go over? He stood in the darkness outside the righteous grave for 2 hours. He did not rashly walk forward. He only raised his head and looked out into the distance, looking at the majestic mountain peaks and the topography of this place. Before the 4th hour arrived, he suddenly turned around and left. At this time the sky was still pitch black, but to be precise, another day had already passed. There were still 20 days until the next full moon. Lu Qin quietly left the righteous grave area, but what he did not know was that when he left in the dark courtyard, the corpse watcher did not go to sleep like he said he would, but stood alone in the middle of the courtyard as if he was listening to something. When Lu Qin left outside, the corpse watcher finally let out a sigh of relief. He raised his head to look at the sky, suddenly muttering to himself, "These few years the Kunlun party has produced many geniuses, their future is really limitless." Lu Qin took advantage of the night to leave, ready to rush back to Flying Goose platform before daybreak. Although it was unlikely that Su Qingjun would come out to patrol so early in the morning, that woman actually had a very strange and funny little quirk. She especially liked to sleep. On the night that Su Qingjun was seriously injured, Lu Qin had once entered her cave residence. Although later on, no matter who it was, he was very tight-lipped, saying that he had never entered her cave residence, but on that night, Lu Qin did see something that he should not have seen. Su Qingjun seemed to have a rather split personality. She was dignified and beautiful in front of others, but actually a little lazy in private. Lu Qin still clearly remembered that when he entered that day, he saw that the bed in Su Qingjun's cave residence was very clean, everything was very tidy. Only the quilt was not folded. When he thought of these things in his heart, he was secretly a little amused, but perhaps Su Qingjun had warned him, so he had always kept his mouth shut about this matter. But sometimes when he thought of it, he would still laugh, thinking that if Su Qingjun got married in the future, would she still be able to avoid her husband at that time? In the dark night, the wind was strong and the mountain path was long, but his footsteps were light and quick. Suddenly, from an unknown place in the depths of the darkness, a strange sound came abruptly, like the mouth of a ferocious beast, but also like the sound of a hungry wolf drooling. Lu Chen's footsteps suddenly stopped. In the darkness ahead, in this quiet night of Kunlun Mountain that seemed to have been peaceful and quiet for thousands of years, there were 3 green lights in the shape of a triangle, as if there were 3 eyes on a head. Incomparably strange appeared in front of him. Chapter 185. In the darkness, the shape of the monster's body could not be seen clearly. Only those 3 strange green eyes stared intently at Lu Qin. At that moment, Lu Qin almost subconsciously thought of Atsu. In the past, in the middle of the night, Atsu's eyes also had a similar fire-like glow. But the two were different. Lu Qin quickly made this judgment. Although Atsu's eyes were green, the luster in them was clean and bright. Although it looked a little gloomy in the dark, one could still feel the change of emotion in them. There was that kind of vitality. The emerald green eyes that suddenly appeared in front of him were much stronger than Atsu's eyes. They were like 3 burning green flames that were filled with a brutal and cruel aura, as if there was only the intention to kill left. For some reason, after seeing this clearly, Lu Qin secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Then his face quickly sank. He frowned and looked at the strange monster that suddenly appeared in the dark. Of course, this thing was not a kind creature. Just the brutal aura that came from the dark was enough to make him categorize it as one of the most ferocious creatures he had ever seen in his life. Almost all the creatures that he had seen in the past were in the most dangerous places in this vast land of China, which was the depths of the land of chaos. But this place was clearly the Kunlun Mountain, the spiritual mountain of the Western land, the mountain base of the Kunlun party. How could there be such a ferocious monster? Many questions flashed in Lu Chen's mind, but he did not think too much about it. Because after the strange emerald green eyes confronted him for a moment, the monster seemed to be unable to suppress its desire for flesh and blood. It let out an ear-piercing shriek and suddenly rushed over. The sound of the monster breaking through the air was incomparably sharp, like an arrow that had been released from a bow. Because of the monster's movement, Lu Qin vaguely saw a little of the monster's appearance. It looked like a strange snake-like insect. It was half the length of an arm and its body was only as thick as a thumb. However, it had a strange head the size of a fist. The most eye-catching and most terrifying 3 green eyes were on the top of the monster's head. The whistling sound seemed to carry darkness with it as it rushed over. Lu Chen's face was as calm as still water. He took a step back and flipped his right palm. A black short sword appeared in his hand and he slashed it down. However, the strange insect's speed was so fast that it actually made a turn in midair and avoided the sharp blade. It even took advantage of the situation and flipped up from the blade. In an instant, it curled around Lu Chen's wrist. Then it lowered its head and directly bit Lu Chen's wrist. These few movements were incomparably fast. The strange insect's speed was frighteningly fast, and Lu Chen couldn't react for a moment. He only felt a sudden sharp pain in his wrist, and at that moment he seemed to hear another kind of frightening sound. It was the sound of skin tearing and flesh scraping against bones. It was the sound of the terrifying strange insect devouring flesh and blood in a frenzy. Moreover, almost in an instant the strange insect actually wriggled madly. Then it directly drilled into the wound it had bitten, directly entering into Lu Chen's arm. A terrifying pain surged up from his arm like a tide. Lu Chen's palm trembled violently. At that moment he instantly lost control of his right hand. His fingers loosened powerlessly and the black short sword fell to the ground. And in the dim light in the darkness, He could even see a twisted and terrifying scar bulging on his skin. It was desperately twisting, constantly rushing up his arm. It seemed that in a short moment, the strange insect would rush through his shoulder blade and straight into his chest to gnaw at his heart, lungs, and 5 internal organs. In this dark night, it was suddenly filled with infinite terrifying killing intent. It was as if the whole world had turned into a sheet of ice. Lu Chen suddenly snorted coldly. A dark flame suddenly lit up from the depths of his eyes. At the same time, in the most secret depths of his body, the quiet and lonely 5 elements divine plate suddenly trembled violently and then suddenly flipped over. The black divine plate appeared again. That dot of black flame burned in his chi. In an instant, the black flame flourished. The strange insect in his arms suddenly stopped. It seemed that in that instant, it also felt something. Even in front of his flesh and blood, this strange insect unexpectedly showed a trace of inexplicable fear. It actually had some intention of retreating. However, the darkness had arrived. Like a roar on a boundless dark sea, the endless darkness instantly boiled up and crazily surged towards Lu Chen's body from all directions. The cold wind blew and the darkness whistled. It was like a crazy dance, surrounding the cluster of dark flame in the deepest depths of the shadow. An ice-cold aura dispersed in all directions. There was no longer the slightest mercy or anger. A terrifying and murderous aura suddenly rose from Lu Chen's body. It rolled back and directly rushed from his body towards the strange insect's right arm. The dark flame flickered in this tidal wave. It was like a ferocious smile opening the mouth of an evil spirit to devour all living beings. This murderous aura was even more tyrannical, more terrifying, and more merciless than the aura that the strange insect had just revealed. That strange insect's tyrannical aura seemed to crazily devour flesh and blood. But the murderous aura in Lu Chen's body seemed to be born purely for killing. It wanted to destroy everything and wipe out all the vitality of all living beings. In the darkness, Lu Chen opened his eyes and stood upright. His body suddenly shook. Then, countless black flames suddenly gushed out from his body, burning wildly. But the strange thing was that his clothes were not damaged at all. He looked like a burning man made of black fire. The strange insect suddenly trembled violently, and then it retreated madly. However, it was already too late. The tide of darkness was like a monstrous wave that surged into the heavens, and it charged directly into Lu Chen's right arm. After that, it drowned the strange insect that was hidden within his flesh. Everything, in an instant, was silent. After the tide, the world was as quiet as before. Only Lu Chen's body was still standing in the darkness, gently gasping for breath. After a moment, he slowly raised his right hand and then gently shook it. With a pata, a small piece of burnt black shrunk to the size of a little finger as hard as a rock, fell out from his wound. Then it heavily hit the ground and rolled twice. The night wind was cold, blowing past his body. Lu Chen felt a chill from his forehead, neck and back. Only now did he discover that in that instant, his entire body was covered in cold sweat. The black flames were still burning in his eyes. The tide of darkness was still surging in his body. He gently gasped for breath, feeling a trace of trembling. The surging black flames gradually calmed down. Then they slowly retreated, shrinking back into his body. The night once again calmed down. Even the darkness became gentle, gently clustered around him, comforting his body. But at this time, in the strange black tide that was gradually returning to the energy sea, Lu Chen suddenly felt a trace of a different aura. It was a new aura with a murderous and tyrannical aura. It was the aura that the black flames had plundered after killing the strange insect. In the past, when he had this strange black disk, every time he killed a living being, a trace of a similar aura would be absorbed into the black flames on the black disk. Then it would nourish and strengthen the black flames. Lu Chen didn't understand it, nor did he like this sort of feeling. It was even to the extent that he faintly had the feeling that if this continued, then he would probably sink into this terrifying slaughter one day and be doomed eternally. Therefore, after that, he rarely killed living beings unless it was absolutely necessary and when he had to protect himself. But this night, the aura he felt was completely different from the previous slaughter. The murderous aura that had been plundered was strong and abundant, almost 10 times stronger than any slaughter in the past. And after absorbing this strong new power, the black flames on the black disk in Lu Chen's energy sea seemed to instantly grow larger. In that dark world, it burned quietly as if it was showing a mocking smile to the owner of this body. Lu Chen stood in place in silence for a long time. Then he closed his eyes. After a long time, when he opened his eyes again, the black flames had disappeared. The surrounding night wind had cooled down and was no longer harsh. It blew through the forest as if nothing had happened in the night. Lu Chen took a step forward and squatted down. There was a black thing on the ground. He picked up the black dagger that had fallen to the side and gently fiddled with it. After confirming that there was nothing strange, he picked it up again. This was the remains of that strange insect. Under the burning of the terrifying and violent black flames in his body, this strange insect had almost no ability to resist and was directly killed. Then its entire body was instantly incinerated, leaving only some of the hardest residue that was gathered together and turned into this black and hard stone. Of course, the strange green eyes were gone, but when Lu Chen's fingers slowly brushed across this black stone, he could still vaguely feel some soul-stirring patterns and traces. The residue of the bones and sharp teeth had fused together. It was hard to imagine that not long ago, this thing was still in the flesh like a bloodthirsty demon. Why would there be such a terrible and cruel monster in the Kunlun Mountains? No matter how one looked at it, it was impossible for this kind of thing to appear in the Kunlun Mountains. There were 2 deity transformation stage perfected cultivators, dozens of Yuaning stage perfected cultivators, and more powerful cultivators. There were about 100,000 people in the famous sections. Any slightly more ferocious demon beasts had long been driven away. And Lu Chen was very sure that he had never heard of this kind of thing. No one in the Kunlun party had ever mentioned it. It seemed that no one had ever known that this kind of monster that suddenly appeared in the night had only appeared out of thin air tonight. Where did it come from? Lu Chen's brows were tightly furrowed. His palm tightly grasped the charred remains of the stone. He looked into the distance, only to see the shadows of the distant mountains. The darkness seemed to be everywhere. Chapter 186. That morning, when Lu Chen walked out of his wooden hut with a yawn, he saw a man standing with his hands behind his back on the quiet Fian terrace, not far from his wooden hut. He looked to be in his 40s or 50s. He had a refined bearing and a calm expression. Perhaps it was because of his age there were already some stars on his temples, but it could still be seen that he was still in the prime of his life. The man stood there looking at the sea of clouds beyond the cliff. Then he turned around and saw Lu Chen. He smiled calmly and quietly, nodding at Lu Chen and saying, "Hello." "Yes, hello. May I ask who you are, senior?" Lu Chen tried to recall, but he had no impression of this person before, so he asked politely. The man walked toward him and stopped a few feet away from Lu Chen. He wasn't too close to make it awkward, but he wasn't too far away to make it seem rude. He looked Lu Chen up and down, then nodded and said with a smile, "You must be Lu Chen?" "I am Lu Chen. Do you know me, senior?" Lu Chen was a little surprised. The man smiled and said, "Oh, I don't think we've met before. Let me introduce myself. My surname is Su and my name is Tianhe." "Su Tianhe." Lu Chen repeated the name in his heart. Suddenly his expression changed. He looked at the man's face again and found him familiar. There were some similarities between him and Su Qingjun. He was surprised and said, "Could you be from the Su family?" Su Tianhe smiled and nodded. "I can be considered the head of the Su family and also Qingjun's father." Lu Chen was speechless. He didn't expect the head of the Su family to come to the Fian Terrace alone so early in the morning. But judging from Su Tianhe's extraordinary bearing, he was completely different from the young people in his family. At this moment, Su Tianhe's gaze swept over Lu Chen's face. After a while, he sighed and said, "Brother Lu, I didn't teach my son well and wasn't strict enough with my subordinates, causing you to suffer. This is all the fault of the Su family. I apologize in advance." After saying that, he solemnly cupped his hands and bowed to Lu Chen. Lu Chen raised his eyebrows and a strange light flashed in his eyes, but he quickly stepped aside and said, "Senior, please don't do this. I don't deserve it." Su Tianhe smiled at Lu Chen and said, "Brother Lu is reasonable and an outstanding person. I believe you are also a broad-minded person." As he said that, he stepped forward and stuffed a cloth bag into Lu Chen's hand, saying, "There are some rare spiritual materials in this bag. They are probably worth thousands of spiritual stones. It's just a small token of my appreciation, but it can't make up for the guilt in my heart. Please accept it, Brother Lu. For the sake of my old face, please don't hold a grudge against our Su clan." As he said that, he looked at Lu Chen with a sincere expression. Lu Chen's face also showed some fear and nodded, saying, "Senior Su, you are too polite. How can I accept this?" As he said those polite words, Lu Chen was about to push the cloth bag out, but his fingers tightened on the cloth bag. Su Tianhe glanced at the cloth bag and a smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. He was determined to give it to Lu Qin. The two pushed for a while, but in the end, Lu Qin reluctantly accepted it and thanked Su Tianhe with a happy face. After joking for a while, Su Tianhe and Lu Qin seemed to be chatting very congenially. Su Tianhe glanced at the cave on the other side and turned to Lu Qin, saying, "Brother Lu, I think it's getting late. Can you help me call Qing Jun and ask her to come out and meet me?" Lu Qin was slightly surprised and said, "Senior, you and she are father and daughter. Can't you just go and call her directly?" Su Tianhe sighed and said, "Brother Lu, you don't know. I was not at home a while ago. I heard that Qing Jun came back and quarreled with my wife and a few brothers. After that, we didn't contact each other for a few days. When I came back and heard about this, I immediately reprimanded them and then came up the mountain." Speaking up to here, he paused for a moment and then said sincerely, "In fact, what you said just now is also reasonable. Qing Jun and I are father and daughter. Everything can naturally be discussed. But I'm afraid that she is still angry and unwilling to see me. So, I'll have to trouble Brother Lu." Lu Qin nodded and said, "So that's how it is. All right then, I'll help you call her. However, I have to warn you first that I don't dare to guarantee that she'll come out to see you herself." Su Tianhe laughed and looked relaxed, but there seemed to be a glimmer of light flashing in the depths of his eyes. He said with a smile, "Haha, it seems that Brother Lu really understands Qing Jun. Do you know that it's a little difficult to call her this morning?" Lu Qin was startled for a moment, then immediately shook his head and said with a smile, "No, no, no. Senior Su, you misunderstand. How would I know? I'm just afraid that a lowly odd-job disciple like me might not pay attention to young lady Su even if I call her. All right, wait a moment, I'll go call her for you." As he said this, he turned around and walked towards the stone door of the cave residence. The morning sun sprinkled down from the sky and shone on the faces of the two men. When Lu Qin turned his back to Su Tianhe, the smiles on their faces disappeared at the same time. The man's gaze was calm and somewhat cold, deep as the sea. Lu Qin stood in front of the stone door of the cave residence and began to loudly knock on the door. Occasionally he and Su Tianhe would look back and smile at each other and nod slightly. But after a long time the stone door still didn't move. It seemed that Su Qingjun had no intention of coming out. Lu Qin touched his chest. There was still a yellow talisman stone lying there. It was the heart-burning talisman that Su Qingjun gave him when he planted the eagle fruit tree. She didn't take it back later on. So these days if he wanted to find Su Qingjun he wouldn't knock on the door like this. But now he had no intention of using the heart-burning talisman. After calling for a while he turned back to look at Su Tianhe and said somewhat helplessly, "Senior, you see." Su Tianhe nodded and pondered for a moment before saying to Lu Qin, "In that case, it's not good for me to stay here for a long time. Moreover, I do have some things to do in the city below the mountain so I can only leave first. Brother Lu, when you see Qingjun, please help me tell her that I've come to see her. We're all family so there's nothing that can't be said. Ask her to come down the mountain to see me when she has time." Lu Qin responded and said, "Senior, rest assured I will definitely pass on the message." Su Tianhe smiled and cupped his hands, then turned around and left. From the beginning to the end, he was elegant and approachable, completely different from the other Su family members that Lu Qin had seen before. He was a person that made it difficult for people not to have a good impression of him. Lu Qin's brows furrowed slightly as he watched his figure gradually disappear into the distance. As usual, Su Qingjun waited until the evening of this day before she slowly walked out of the cave residence and strolled around the Fian Terrace. Lu Qin saw her and told Su Qingjun about Su Tianhe's visit during the day. After listening, Su Qingjun was silent. The expression on her face looked a little complicated, faintly a little annoyed, but also a little guilty and ashamed. Lu Qin saw the change in her expression and did not say much. He just truthfully repeated Su Tianhe's words to her and then walked away. In that evening, Su Qingjun stood on the edge of the cliff and looked at the sea of clouds for a long time. The position where she stood was exactly where Su Tianhe stood during the day. "I heard that the most difficult thing to give up in this world is the affection between parents and children," Lu Qin said to old Ma with emotion. "Unfortunately, I have never felt this feeling since I was a child. I don't know if it's so deep and hard to give up." Old Ma smiled and said, "Who said it isn't? But I didn't expect that you would tell that old man Su's words so honestly. I thought you would at least do something to it." "Nonsense, I'm not that kind of person," Lu Qin said. "Believe me, you are," old Ma said. He then lowered his head and dodged a cup that Lu Qin threw at him. Then he said with a smile, "So, as a result of this message, Su Qingjun went down the mountain and went home today?" Lu Qin nodded and said, "She has been a filial daughter of a noble family for 20 years. Her parents are still alive. How can she really break up with them? Moreover, don't underestimate Su Tianhe. I think he is very shrewd and not easy to deal with. He is much better than his useless nephews. Old Ma said with a and said, yes, the Su family has been thriving these years and Su Tianhe has contributed a lot. Lu Qin did not talk about this. They sat for a while and Lu Qin suddenly said, how many days until the next full moon night? Old Ma was startled and said, why do you ask this? He said with a frown for a moment and then said, 19 days. Lu Qin was silent for a moment and said, can the damn Baldy come back before that day? Old Ma's eyes narrowed and his face suddenly became serious. He stared at Lu Qin and said in a low voice, what's going on? Could it be that the spy has made a move? Lu Qin hesitated and said, I can't be completely sure. As he spoke, he told Old Ma about the mysterious symbol he found in the forest that day and what he understood from it. In the end he said, whether the traitor will appear that day or not, and whether he will meet me, I still can't say for sure. Old Ma thought for a moment and said, I will immediately report this to Milord, and then you come back in 3 days. How about it? Lu Qin nodded and said, okay. Old Ma still showed a trace of joy on his face and said, if we can find the spy so smoothly, we will be relieved. Lu Qin smiled and said, what's wrong? Could it be that you originally wanted to search here for more than 10 years? Old Ma thought for a moment and said with a smile, I don't need more than 10 years, but I really thought that it might take at least a few years. The two smiled at each other. After a moment, Lu Qin seemed to ask him casually, oh yes, you are quite knowledgeable. Have you heard of a strange insect with 3 green eyes, shaped like a small snake that devours flesh and blood? Chapter 187. Old Ma was stunned for a moment and said, what is it? Tell me in detail. Lu Qin told Old Ma about the appearance of the strange 3-eyed insect he saw last night in detail, but ignored the short but thrilling and extremely dangerous fight. Old Ma also frowned after hearing this. After pondering for a while, he shook his head and said, I have never heard of such a strange and ferocious creature in this world before. Well, I will help you check it later. Lu Qin knew that besides being well informed, Old Ma also had all kinds of connections. For so many years he had no confidence in Old Ma, but his confidence in this aspect had never wavered. He nodded and said, okay. Old Ma pondered for a moment, and suddenly showed a trace of doubt on his face. He looked at Lu Qin and said, strange. This kind of monster is so cruel and it must have killed many people. How could it appear in a place like Kunlun Mountain? Lu Qin also nodded and said, yes, I also thought of this last night but I also couldn't figure it out. And I've been on the mountain for so long, but I've never heard of anyone talking about this kind of monster before. Even earlier there was no news about it. It should have just appeared suddenly? Old Ma's face suddenly darkened and he lowered his voice and said softly, is it really so coincidental? Could it be that someone has their eyes on you? Lu Qin also fell silent. After a moment he said, it shouldn't be. At present, the Su family was the only one who was unhappy with me. However, with Su Qingjun around they wouldn't dare to act recklessly. Not to mention that Su Tianhe had personally come to the Flying Goose Terrace once. It was obvious that he wanted to ease the relationship between father and daughter. At this critical moment they won't act recklessly. Old Ma nodded slowly and said, what you said makes sense, but I always feel that there may be some undercurrent surging in Kunlun Mountain recently. You should be careful. Lu Qin grunted in acknowledgement, then glanced at him and said, what do you mean by undercurrents? Explain it clearly. Could it be that you've heard some rumors recently? Old Ma hesitated for a moment and said, I did hear some news before. It said that there is someone in the Kunlun party, well, at the level of Immortal Yuanying, who is dissatisfied with the current leader, Immortal Idol Month. Lu Qin raised his eyebrows, and his expression suddenly became serious. He said softly, really? Old Ma nodded and said, most likely true. Lu Qin did not ask Old Ma where this news came from. Years of friendship and getting along with each other had long made him understand the propriety of this matter. Moreover, he also believed that since Old Ma dared to tell him this news, it was most likely confirmed. He pondered for a moment and suddenly laughed, but his voice was still low. He said, questioning the current leader, Immortal Idol Month, and there is a perfected cultivator of deity transformation above him. Which Immortal Yuanying is so bold to do so? Will there be any good consequences in the future? Logically speaking, it shouldn't be. Which big shot in that realm is simple. Each of them should be as cunning as a fox. Old Ma smiled and said, logically speaking, maybe so. Lu Chen looked at him and his eyes suddenly lit up. A trace of a smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. He said, that is to say, there must be something unreasonable in this. Let me think. All the principles in this world can only be justified if there is a foundation. But on Kunlun Mountain, those who can face Immortal Idol Month, including that Hakushin Jinkuin, are all qualified to be unreasonable. Those Yuanying Zenrens are not enough. Old Ma smiled and said nothing. Lu Chen shook his head and sighed. He said, damn Baldy can't hold it in anymore? Old Ma shrugged and said, I think it's not that he can't hold it in anymore. It's just that most of the adults are in Zhengxianming now and few are in the sect. Hakushin Jinkuin Mountain is the strongest on Kunlun Mountain. He probably needs to find a few opportunities to make a statement and show his existence. Lu Chen nodded and said, that makes sense. No wonder those Yuanying Zenrens dare to say such strange things. They have a backer behind them. Are those two from Baichao Tang's sect who are talking? Old Ma said, I heard that there are 3 or 4 of them, but the loudest one should be Qiandeng and Mingzhu Jinren. And they do have a good reason to do so. After all, this time their excuse is related to Baichao Tang's sect. Lu Chen was stunned. He said, what's their excuse? Old Ma smiled and said, last time, a demon from the devil cult assassinated a servant disciple of Kunlun party. After many days of investigation, there was still no news. Naturally, Baichao Tang's sect will complain. I think even Jinren Idol Month can't say anything about it. Lu Chen was silent for a moment. He said, good move. On this day both Su Qingjun and Lu Chen went down the mountain. Flying Goose Terrace was deserted. Except for the cave residence with the closed stone door, there was only a lonely wooden house with a black dog inside. Atsu seemed to be completely used to living in Flying Goose Terrace. Every day after waking up, it would walk around Flying Goose Terrace like a king inspecting his territory. From time to time, it would find a corner or a tree root to pee. Originally, it would run to the cave residence's stone door to do this, but under Su Qingjuan's strong protest and Lu Chen's scolding, Atsu cleverly avoided that area. But sometimes, when it looked at the stone wall, there was still a hint of regret in its one eye. Flying Goose Terrace was a secluded place. Usually people rarely came here. There were no fierce beasts in the forest, but there were many birds. Usually the birds' clear and melodious chirping added a bit of fairy-like atmosphere to the place. After Atsu patrolled around, it walked to the cliff and lay on the ground, staring blankly at the sea of clouds in the distance. In the past, whenever it was free during the day, Atsu would not stay alone like this. It would often run out into the forest to play, cross mountains and rivers and run to its heart's content. At that time, it even liked to go to the strange Doghead Mountain to look for the giant oxen and see the layers of strange beasts on the mountain. Those days seemed to be just yesterday. Back then, Atsu was happy and full of energy every day. But now it was different. Atsu no longer looked for oxen and it no longer went to the Doghead Mountain. It even rarely entered the forest. Even if it ran into the forest, it would at most stay near Flying Goose Terrace. It would not go any further. All these changes stemmed from that heart-wrenching and cruel tyranny. It was so badly injured that it almost lost its life. It was so badly injured that it was filled with fear ever since. Since that dark night, Atsu almost no longer trusted anyone other than Lu Chen. Perhaps Exin was an exception. It also stopped looking for the strange beasts in the forest. When it recovered and went to the Doghead Mountain again, Atsu found that the strange beasts looked at it in a different way. The respect they once had was gone. Instead, it was replaced by mockery, contempt, mockery, and ferocity, who would look up to a dog that was covered in wounds and had only one eye and half of its tail left. When it passed by, the tiger roared at it. The crane pecked its head with its beak. The monkey grabbed a branch and swung it across the sky, reaching out to grab half of the dog's tail and laughing crazily. There were even more beasts that looked on coldly. No matter how the black dog wailed, they were indifferent. Occasionally, when the dog fell in front of them, they would kick it. In all the forests in the world, the strong preyed on the weak. If the strong were to be respected, who would sympathize with you when you were crippled and suffer? Atsu once looked up at the peak of the mountain. The huge figure was lying there as usual. It looked like it was sleeping, but it also looked like it could not be bothered to care about these trivial things. After that, Atsu left that place and never returned. Since then it stayed by Lu Chen's side even more. Even if it was a dark night, it would curl up next to Lu Chen to sleep. That day the sun was warm. It shone on the sea of clouds and the black dog's body. Atsu yawned lazily and lowered its head to the ground. It felt a little bored. It glanced at the mountain path that led down from the flying goose platform. There was no one on the mountain path. It knew that there was still some time before Lu Qin returned. A few crisp chirps of birds came from the forest. Atsu thought for a while, then got up and walked toward the back of the mountain. It seemed to have a love for the forest in its body. Like the feeling of being in the forest. Walking into the forest behind the flying goose platform, there were old trees and vines that had grown for many years everywhere. The air was filled with a fresh scent, which made Atsu feel much better. It sniffed everywhere and seemed to be happy. Even its footsteps became lighter. Just like that, it walked and stopped, running and jumping. The changing light and shadow in the quiet forest was like a paradise that belonged only to the black dog. Suddenly, Atsu stopped in its tracks. It raised its head and stared ahead with its only eye. There was a big rock next to a big tree over there. A figure stood under the rock. At that moment, it heard the noise and turned to look. When its gaze swept across Atsu, it smiled. It was White Lotus. This mysterious and beautiful fairy-like girl suddenly appeared in the forest behind the flying goose terrace. At first glance, she seemed to be a beautiful fairy in this emerald green forest, but for some reason, there seemed to be a trace of an indescribably strange aura about her. She smiled and waved at Atsu. Then, she lay on the rock and looked forward as if she was secretly peeping at something. Atsu was a little hesitant. It instinctively wanted to step back, but after a moment, White Lotus waved at it again. Atsu slowly walked to her side. White Lotus pointed behind the rock and whispered to Atsu, "Look." Atsu also became a little nervous. It secretly poked its head out and saw that in the open space in the forest about 6 feet behind the rock, there was a guinea pheasant standing on the ground, looking for food in the fallen leaves with its head down. It was also at this moment that Atsu suddenly heard a soft and somewhat bewitching voice, like the whisper of the devil floating beside it. The pheasant's meat must be delicious. Atsu's body suddenly tensed up. Chapter 188. In the quiet forest, White Lotus and Atsu were like thieves, sneakily hiding behind a big rock, peeping at the pheasant that was foraging for food in the forest in front of them. The pheasant looked very beautiful, with beautiful pearl-like spots dotted on its bright feathers. Its long tail feathers kept moving up and down, sweeping across the forest in a stunning arc. Atsu watched for a while, then retracted its head and turned around to leave. However, a small white hand stopped it. White Lotus looked at it with a faint smile on her face, then gently hugged Atsu's neck. For some reason, Atsu was wary of almost everyone except Lu Qin and Exin, but only in front of this White Lotus. Although it was not very close to this little girl, it did not react too strongly to White Lotus's various actions. Right now, Atsu was somewhat obediently pulled back by White Lotus. Its only eye was looking at White Lotus's overly beautiful face, and its eyes flashed with a little uneasiness. White Lotus pressed it down and sat behind the rock, ignoring the dirt on the ground. She just smiled, then moved closer to Atsu's ear and whispered, "I think you are a different dog. There are some strange things about you that I have never been able to figure out." Atsu tilted its head and seemed to want to leave again, but it was pulled back by White Lotus. The little girl stared into Atsu's eyes. Although this black dog was ugly and fierce, she did not have the slightest disgust or contempt. In fact, there was a rare trace of gentleness in her eyes. She just smiled and whispered, "You should be more than this, Atsu. I don't know why you don't eat blood and living things." She gently raised her body and glanced at the gap in the rock. After confirming that the pheasant was still behind, she turned around and said to Atsu, "You are the first demonic beast I have seen that survived after suffering from the blood-eating secret method. Do you know what this result means?" She clenched her fist and waved it in front of Atsu, saying, "In those dirty barbarian tribes, demonic beasts like you have another name. Holy beast." White Lotus said with a smile, then gently touched Atsu's head. Kunwa City, Black Hill Pavilion. Lu Qin stood up and said to Old Ma, "It's getting late. You keep an eye on these things first. Later we will." Before he finished speaking, Old Ma stretched out his hand and stopped him, saying, "Don't go yet. I still have something to tell you." Lu Qin said, "What is it?" Old Ma said, "I found He Gang." Lu Qin raised his eyebrows. He glanced at Old Ma, then sat down again and said, "Where?" Old Ma said, "In this Kunwa City." Lu Qin smiled and said, "Good. Fatty, your methods are more powerful than I thought." Old Ma said modestly, "You flatter me. This is my job. It's my duty. There's no need to make a fuss about it." Lu Qin snorted and said, "Hypocrite. There really aren't any good fatties these days." Old Ma couldn't take it anymore and said, "How can you be like this? You always become hostile and scold people. Although some people have wronged you, not all fatties are like this. Let me tell you, fatties also have dignity." Old Ma said righteously. "Oh, I'm sorry," Lu Qin said. Old Ma was stunned for a moment. He didn't expect Lu Qin to admit his mistake so straightforwardly. For a moment he felt a bit embarrassed and said with a hollow laugh, It's actually nothing." "It's nothing?" Lu Qin smiled faintly and looked at Old Ma without saying anything. Old Ma suddenly felt a bit scared when he was looked at like this. He subconsciously took a step back and said, What are you thinking? I'm telling you, don't mess around. Fatties aren't easy to deal with. I'm telling you." Lu Qin walked forward and patted his shoulder. He suddenly sighed and said softly, "Old Ma, it's my luck to have you accompany me for more than 10 years. He paused for a moment and then said word by word, "Thank you." Old Ma was stunned for a moment and then slightly lowered his head. After a moment he suddenly laughed, but his laughter was a bit hoarse. He scolded with a smile, "Thank you, my ass. Do you think I really wanted to accompany you? Wasn't it because I had no other choice? I'm telling you, you owe me a lot of favors for more than 10 years. "Oh, did I?" Lu Qin asked. "Nonsense, of course I did. How many times have I helped you? How many times have I saved you? If I exchanged all of that for spirit stones, it would be enough for us to buy a street in Kunwu City. Is it actually so valuable? But why do I feel that even if the two of us added up, we wouldn't be able to exchange for a single shop in Kunwu City? Not to mention an entire street. This isn't important." Old Ma rubbed his head and very calmly threw this awkward question to the back of his mind. Then it could be seen that his mood suddenly became very good. He had a very happy smile on his face. He laughed and reached out to pat Lu Chen's shoulder, but he quickly withdrew his hand. He probably felt that doing so was too unmanly. He took 2 steps to the side and took a deep breath. He seemed to have regained his composure. He then turned around and said with a smile, "Less nonsense. Tell me, what should we do with that he gang?" Lu Qin pondered for a moment and said, "Keep an eye on him for the time being. Don't touch him?" Old Ma grunted and said, "But he has always been investigating that matter. What should we do?" Lu Qin said, "Let him investigate. Maybe he can alert some people hiding in the dark." "Fine. Then you be careful." Lu Qin thought for a moment and said, "But it's not good to completely ignore it. You find someone to keep an eye on that guy. Otherwise, when we're about to make a move, we can't suddenly find him." Old Ma nodded and said, "Of course that's not a problem. But what do you plan to do about making a move?" Lu Qin smiled and said, "This depends on he. If the time is right, we can use his most valued younger brother to force him. Presumably he will also do something unexpected." Old Ma glanced at him and nodded in agreement. Lu Qin was silent for a moment. Then he suddenly smiled bitterly and said, "What I said. Am I born to be an evil person?" Old Ma comforted him, "How can there be so much right and wrong? Our hands have been stained with a lot of blood, but I always feel that what we've done all these years is always right." Lu Qin stared into Old Ma's eyes and said, "Is that what you think?" Old Ma nodded and said frankly, "Yes, that's what I think. I feel that the two of us, as well as the Supreme, have never done anything wrong." Lu Qin took a deep breath and nodded, "You're right. Then I'm leaving. Take care. Be careful. I'll find a chance to go down the mountain in a couple of days," Lu Qin said. Old Ma sent him to the door of the Black Hill Pavilion and said, That's fine. It's all up to you. In short, it's all about your own safety. Don't force yourself." Lu Qin smiled and turned to leave. But Old Ma suddenly seemed to remember something and asked him, "Right? You told me about the 3-eyed strange insect earlier. What? Did you think of something?" Lu Qin turned to look at him. Old Ma shook his head and said, "That's not it. I'm just a little curious. If that strange insect was as fierce and gluttonous as you said, there would have been a fierce battle when it met you that night?" He looked at Lu Qin and asked, "What was the result of the battle?" Lu Qin closed his eyes for a moment and then he shrugged and said, "That strange insect really was ferocious and very troublesome. I was thrown into confusion when it suddenly charged out and I was almost injured by it. But then I used a dagger to defend myself. After a few rounds, the strange insect couldn't do anything to me and ran away." As he said this, one of his hands hung at his side. In the sleeve of his robe, there was a hard and coarse charred black stone gently rolling in his palm. There were some fierce marks on it. Old Ma let out an "ah" and looked a little disappointed. "I see. Didn't the strange insect leave anything behind? Any bones, limbs, or pieces of flesh would do. Perhaps it would be easier to find it this way. He paused for a moment and smiled. Looks like you've recovered well recently. Although your cultivation has been crippled, your combat power is not low. Lu Qin was silent for a moment. He looked at old Ma. His lips moved slightly, but he still pursed them. He curled his fingers and clenched the remains of the strange insect in his hand. Then he smiled and said, "Yes, I didn't leave anything behind. You slowly go over and bite its neck." Bai Lian's voice reverberated through the quiet forest, reverberating in Atu's ears. It was as if the first time they had met, the scene of blood-stained red once again appeared before his eyes. Atsu's breathing began to quicken. White Lotus looked at Atsu. There was a hint of excitement in her eyes. It was the kind of joy a girl would have when she saw her favorite toy. There was also a hint of strange cruelty in her eyes. Go. You are different from the other demonic beasts. They should be ants crawling under your feet. You're the holy beast that's rarely seen in 100 years. Go bite it and drink its blood. Atsu slowly turned its head. Its only eye reflected the figure of the pheasant. There was a touch of blood, but it seemed to be struggling. After killing and drinking blood, you'll be completely different, Atsu? White Lotus gently squatted beside the black dog and stroked its head. Her face was like a fairy, but her voice was like a demon from hell. It was light and full of bewitchment. Go. After you start killing, the power of the blood-feeding secret method will grow in your body. You'll become a more powerful existence than any other monster. Atsu suddenly raised its head and looked in front. At that moment, no one knew whether the crippled black dog understood the meaning of those words. However, its eyes had already turned completely red. Blood red. Chapter 189. The days passed quietly and a lot of things happened naturally. Su Qingjun went back to the Su family. Under the comfort and persuasion of her father, Su Tianhe, she finally reconciled with her family. Originally, they had been a family of blood relatives for decades. How could they really cut off this familial love? Moreover, Su Tianhe gave his genius daughter enough face and punished the 3 brothers of the Su family. Even Su Qingjuan's mother, Madame Bai, had tears in her eyes. She hugged Su Qingjun and cried. As a result, after the storm, the Su family became harmonious again. However, after this time, the entire Su family clearly saw that Su Qingjuan's status in the family was like a crane in a flock of chickens, and no one could compare to her. After returning to the mountain, Su Qingjun saw Lu Qin. She was a little embarrassed, but she still told him about it. Lu Qin just smiled and congratulated her. He didn't say much, nor did he complain about the pain and suffering he had suffered in vain. Su Qingjun wanted to make it up to him, but she didn't know what to do at the moment. She thought that there was still a long way to go, so she wasn't in a hurry. In any case, now that Lu Qin had the status of a nominal disciple, she had a reason to take care of him. In the future, she would find a chance to accept him as a direct disciple. She would provide him with all kinds of resources and elixirs. At the end of the day, he would be able to reach the Foundation establishment realm. That way, his life of cultivation wouldn't be in vain. There were still 18 days until the next full moon. When the moon rose, it seemed to be thinner than yesterday. The moonlight was still very bright. It shone on the windowsill of the wooden house on the Flying Goose Terrace like frost and snow. Lu Qin lay on the bed and quietly looked at the night outside the window. After a while, there was a slight movement in the darkness. Atsu walked over and leaned against him. He lifted his front feet and placed them on the windowsill. He also looked at the moon outside. The moonlight shone on the man and the dog, and it was as soft as water ripples. Lu Qin reached out to touch Atsu's body and found that the black dog was staring at the moon in the sky in a daze. Its only eye was shining with an inexplicable brilliance, like a black, transparent gem. There was a hint of loneliness in his gaze. He looked forward to it. Lu Qin looked at Atsu quietly and did not disturb it. After a while, Atsu turned around and looked at Lu Qin again. Under the moonlight, Atsu's single eye flickered and gradually became gentle. Then it obediently lay down beside Lu Qin, snuggled up to him, closed its eyes and fell into a deep sleep. Lu Qin closed the window and darkness descended upon the room. For a moment he suddenly wished he had a mirror so that he could look at his own face and eyes. Because just now, he suddenly felt an inexplicable sense of familiarity from Atsu's gaze. It was just like him 10 years ago. These few days when it was late at night, Lu Qin would secretly go out and walk through the mountain paths of the Kunlun Mountains in the dark, carefully testing the boundless darkness. However, the strange three-eyed strange insect never appeared again. That soul-stirring and dangerous encounter that night seemed to be an accident, or perhaps it was just an inexplicable coincidence. If it were not for the fact that Lu Chen was still holding a hard, charred stone in his hand, the scene that night might really be like a dream and not real. However, the rough feeling of the black stone in his hand kept reminding Lu Chen of the evil behind the stone. When it was late at night, when even Atsu was immersed in dreamland, Lu Chen quietly left Flying Goose Terrace and walked into the deep night. He did not tell old Ma the whole truth about the strange three-eyed insect, especially when he had already killed such a monster. Because once he told him, it would inevitably involve the biggest secret in his body at the moment, the unprecedented black divine disc, and the horrible nature of robbing vitality to grow. He did not want others to know. Perhaps he had been a shadow for too long and was no longer used to trusting others. Even when it was old Ma who he could entrust his life to, he instinctively wanted to keep the last bit of the secret, as if he was hiding his last trump card. If the strange three-eyed insect did not appear, the matter would have ended without a hitch. Perhaps it was really just a strange monster that came out of nowhere. However, could there really be such a coincidence in this world? In the vast Kunlun Mountains, the strange three-eyed insect did not look for anyone else, and it just happened to meet him? Lu Chen had been a shadow for many years, and he no longer believed in coincidences, including this time. Therefore, he had been thinking hard about this matter, thinking over and over again, trying to find out what was different about him or what was so eye-catching about him. But after thinking about it, he found that he seemed to have only one secret, which might be different enough to attract such a monster. It was still the mysterious black divine disc in his ocean of energy. That night, he pondered for a long time on the dark mountain path, then closed his eyes slightly to the night. The darkness surged around him like a tide, like the rising waves of the sea. When he opened his eyes again, the dark flames were already burning in his pupils. The silent black flames slowly burned on his body. At this moment, there was no longer the pain and despair of the past. The black flames seemed to have become a part of Lu Chen's body, swaying on his flesh. The night was as dark as ink, and the darkness rolled like a tide. This man stood in this dark night, as if he was roaring angrily at the boundless darkness in front of him, a call. Then the night was cold and the darkness was like an abyss. There was no response. Everything seemed dim and dull, only the feeling of loneliness still lingered around him. Lu Chen was a little disappointed, and he quietly let the black flames shrink back into his body and extinguish. But at this moment, his heart suddenly moved, and he looked towards the depths of the Kunlun mountain range. That was a distance that could not be seen, that was the most mysterious forbidden area of the Kunlun mountain range. There was a thick fog that did not dissipate all year round, and there were 4 strange mountain peaks floating in the sky. Passing through the darkness, passing through the mountains, an inexplicable throbbing suddenly surged from the void, as if someone was looking in this direction from afar, but it also seemed like nothing had actually happened. Lu Chen sensed that something was off. But that feeling disappeared in a flash, and did not even give him extra time to carefully savor it. It disappeared in an instant just like that. However, Lu Chen could already feel that something was different in this short period of time. Something was really over there, in that forbidden area, and it was resonating with the dark aura in his body. What kind of secret was hidden in this quiet and incomparably huge Kunlun mountain range? And this secret, could it be related to the spy of the devil cult? During the day, someone came to the Flying Goose platform, and despite Lu Chen's dissuasion, insisted on calling Su Qingjun out of the cave. Su Qingjun was a little unhappy. Of course, this was easy to understand. But very soon, the news brought by this person made Lu Chen and Su Qingjun a little startled. The case of He Changxing's murder, which had caused a sensation for a while but soon died down, suddenly stirred up waves after dragging on for such a long time. He, who was entrusted by the sect masters to investigate this matter, was under great pressure, but still insisted on investigating to the end. Finally, he found something and began to take action. However, the first person he attacked still surprised most of the people. Because He brought people to detain the 3 brothers of the Su family, Sumo, Su Qian and Su Wen. Detaining them under the pretext of investigating the assassination of the devil cult was tantamount to suspecting that the 3 brothers of the Su family were not only related to He Changxing's death, but also possibly colluding with the devil cult. This accusation, or rather, this crime was too big and too heavy, so heavy that even the Su family could not bear it. So, the Su family quickly began to take action. They mobilized their informants in the Kunlun party, as well as some cultivators they were on good terms with to inquire about the news. At the same time, They also tried their best to help the three brothers of the Su family. Among them, the most important was of course Su Qingjun, so the message brought today was to implore Su Qingjun to help as soon as possible. After listening to the news, Su Qingjun looked grim. She did not discuss it with Lu Qin, closed the stone door of the cave, and directly went down the mountain with the messenger. After watching Su Qingjun go far away, Lu Qin also looked down the mountain with a complicated expression. Unlike Su Qingjun, who knew almost nothing about this matter, Lu Qin knew almost everything about He Changxing's murder case. In this world, who knew the most about a murder case? It must be the murderer. Lu Qin waited on the Fian platform for a while, then also got up and went down the mountain. When the Fian platform quieted down, and there was only one dog left, Atsu looked a little anxious and irritated. It looked at the forest in the back of the mountain again and again. After a while it slowly got up and walked in. There was a faint light in the forest, and Atsu could see its surroundings very clearly. As it walked, it heard the familiar chirping of birds. However, that day Atsu did not meet White Lotus again. In fact, after meeting White Lotus that day, Atsu did not see her again. The little girl, who was only a little over 10 years old, seemed to be busier than most adults. Not seeing White Lotus, Atsu did not seem surprised and even looked a little more relaxed. But soon its body tensed up again, because it saw a little bird suddenly fly to the ground in front of the forest, using its beak to search for food in the thick layer of leaves. Almost without any hesitation, Atsu slowly approached it. Its figure and movements were almost silent, as if it was born to do so. Like a genius hunter, it slowly approached the bird. Suddenly the black dog pounced on the bird, and before it could startle it, it bit its wing. Chapter 190. He Yi's sudden action seemed tough and abrupt, and his target was the Su family, a well-known aristocratic family in Kunwu City. Therefore it was hard for people not to think of what happened to his younger brother, He Gang, some time ago. Revenge in public? Or was he deliberately framing others? All kinds of guesses and rumors quickly spread, but after Su Qingjun went down the mountain and met her father, she learned about it through her trusted subordinates in the sect, so she had a general idea of what was going on. First of all, He did take people to detain Sumo and the other two brothers of the Su family, but he only detained them temporarily. He didn't convict them, nor did he interrogate them by torture. In the words of the other side, he just asked them some questions. There was, of course, a world of difference between questioning and convicting them. Although the Su family was still indignant, they calmed down a little. As for why He didn't find anyone else but the Su family, the other side also gave a very powerful reason that made the Su family speechless. Before He Changxing's accident, the three brothers of the Su family had ganged up on and humiliated He Changxing in the fragrance garden. To put it bluntly, they beat him up and threatened him. Then a few days later He Changxing died. If this was not a big suspicion, then no one was more suspicious. When Su Tianhe and the others learned about this, they were also speechless for a long time. But after all, he was a blood relative of the Su family, so they couldn't really give up. Therefore, the Su family still tried their best to mobilize all kinds of connections in the Kunlun party to plead for him. But this method, which had always been successful in the past, ran into a snag this time. The reason was that He didn't fall for it, and the other virtuous elders in the sect declined one after another, unwilling to get involved in this trouble. For this reason, Su Qingjun even went to find her master, Masato Kihara, and the answer she got was, first, make it clear that if there was nothing wrong, nothing would happen and they would let him go. Second, this matter was very troublesome. It was said that even immortals paid attention to it. Ordinary people, including immortal Yuanying, didn't want to get into trouble. In a somewhat anxious and angry mood, the Su family secretly made up their mind to find trouble with He. But soon their anger turned into surprise. The three brothers of the Su family had been questioned separately. Most of the time, the three of them could answer most of the questions. However, when He asked the crucial question, which was the night He Changxing died, where the three of them had gone, Su Qian and Su Wen both gave their own testimonies. However, after Su Imo answered, it was unexpectedly proven that he was lying. Sumo said that he slept alone in his residence that night, but very soon, someone proved that he went out, and then several people saw him. As for asking where he went after that, Sumo was dumbfounded and couldn't answer for a long time. Of course, there was something wrong with this situation. Needless to say, Su Qian and Su Wen were released, but only Sumo was detained. But this time it wasn't so polite. She was directly detained in a secluded quiet room, which was equivalent to being locked up. After that there wasn't much news, but as it spread, it gradually became dark. Because it was said that he was eager to make a contribution, and planned to, or had already started to try to use torture on Sumo. Retribution in the present, retribution in the present. Lu Qin arrived at the Black Hill Pavilion opened by Old Ma in Kunwu City. Listening to Old Ma's gloating tone, Lu Qin couldn't help but shake his head and say, "Don't be too happy. We still don't know whether this news is reliable or not. It's all spread by others. Who cares?" Old Ma laughed and said, "In any case, I've long disliked that guy Sumo. It's best if he suffers a bit more. Unfortunately, my identity is limited, otherwise I really want to go and see with my own eyes." Lu Qin waved his hand. He was too lazy to argue with Old Ma about these things. He sat there and pondered for a moment before saying, "This time, he acted without any warning. Almost no one knew about it beforehand. Feels a bit strange. It seems like he suddenly got hold of some information, so he began to vigorously investigate." Old Ma frowned and the smile on his face faded a bit. He looked at Lu Qin with a hint of worry and asked in a low voice, "What's wrong? Is there any danger?" Lu Qin shook his head and said, "Not yet. Let's wait and see first." After a pause, his eyes suddenly flashed and he said, "Could it be that he got the information from the martyr's grave?" Old Ma walked to the side and returned after a moment. He handed him a letter and said, "Take a look yourself." Lu Qin glanced at the envelope and saw that there was no signature, no specific name and no word on the envelope. He took out 2 pieces of paper. After reading it, he suddenly nodded and then sighed softly. "The damn Baldy said that he will rush back 3 to 5 days before the next full moon night." Old Ma smiled and said, "You see, I told you long ago that the old man still likes you the most. Even if you are a little uncertain, he is still willing to believe you." Lu Qin didn't comment, but he was still silent for a while. Then he stood up and walked 2 steps in the room. He said to Old Ma, "You pay attention to He Gang these days. It's better to send more people to keep an eye on him. Don't let him suddenly run away." Old Ma narrowed his eyes slightly and said, "What do you want to do?" Lu Qin said indifferently, "I haven't thought about it yet, but I've thought about one thing before. Maybe it's a plan to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. If he pursues this matter strictly and refuses to let Sumo off, and at the same time his only blood brother suddenly meets with an accident in Kunwu City, what will the result be?" Old Ma pondered in silence. After a while, he suddenly sucked in a breath of cold air and looked at Lu Qin. For a moment he didn't know what to say. Lu Qin calmly said, "Killing 2 birds with 1 stone. The general idea is that he will definitely suspect that the aristocratic families of Kunwu City, specifically the Su family, did it. In order to vent his anger, he killed his brother, so the hatred between him and the Su family will be deep. Secondly, when the Su family hears this news, they will definitely think that he will be furious. Then who will he vent his anger on?" Old Ma nodded and said, "Good plan. Not bad, not bad." Lu Qin looked at Old Ma and said, "Although Sumo is stupid and annoying, his identity is different from others. He is the legitimate son of clan head Su Tianhe and Su Qingjuan's blood brother. The Su family will absolutely not tolerate anything happening to Sumo." But Old Ma seemed to want to say something, but he was stopped by Lu Qin. Lu Qin didn't have any intention of speaking loudly. He just said to him very calmly, "In the next few days, arrange for someone to go there and do it cleanly." Old Ma was silent for a moment before he nodded and said, "Okay. Right, there's one more thing. When you came last time, you told me about the strange 3-eyed insect." Old Ma suddenly changed the topic and began to talk about other things. "Oh," Lu Qin said and said, "How is it? Did you find any clues?" Old Ma's expression was a little solemn. He looked at Lu Qin with a strange look in his eyes and said, "I've looked into this thing, but the result seems to be that this thing has been extinct for thousands of years. It has long disappeared from this world." Lu Qin was stunned and said in surprise, "What did you say? What is this thing?" Old Ma said, "According to the appearance and talent you mentioned, I couldn't find any clues at first. But after looking through some ancient scrolls with a long history, I finally found a monster similar to it in the oldest one. Blood-devouring insect. That's the name." Old Ma said. "Blood-devouring insect?" Lu Qin frowned and thought for a moment. He said, "I don't think I have heard of it." "It's normal that you haven't heard of it. Even for me, this is the first time I have heard of such a monster. When I went to the Library of Ancient Scrolls and saw the blood-devouring insect, I was really worried about you." Lu Qin said, "Why do you say so?" Old Ma didn't answer and asked, Do you still remember the legend of the two founders of the Kunlun party occupying the spirited mountain of Kunlun and establishing the sect? I remember. The senior brothers and sisters in the Kunlun party had told this story countless times, but there were always people who forgot it. Old Ma nodded and said, "It is related to that. Legend had it that when the two ancestors Kun Yuanzi and Tai Luo established their sects, they used their great magic power to drive all the animals down the mountain. As a result, all kinds of demon beasts ran amok and created a foul atmosphere. But it doesn't matter. It is said that there was a sign in the sky that the divine dragon came to the world and passed down the orthodoxy for thousands of years. But at the same time, evil spirits appeared in the mountain and countless monsters attacked the living creatures. There is a monster called blood-devouring insect." Lu Chen frowned and asked, "Since this thing is so terrible, why didn't the Kunlun party know about it?" "That's because this thing was completely wiped out 3 or 4,000 years ago." Old Ma smiled bitterly and then said in a low voice, "That's why I said that you really seem to have met a ghost this time. Something that hasn't been seen for thousands of years came to trouble you as soon as it came out." Lu Chen shook his head and said, "According to what you said, these blood-devouring insects should have been extinct for thousands of years?" "Yes. Back then, it appeared with the evil spirits that were born in the Kunlun Mountains and harmed the world. At least that's what the book said." Old Ma shrugged and said, "I don't know what happened thousands of years ago." Lu Chen slowly stood up and whispered, "It seems that there are a lot of strange things in that forbidden area." "What did you say?" Old Ma asked him. Lu Chen shook his head and then said to him, "Now there are more things on the Kunlun Mountain. I may not be able to come down at any time these days. Yigang, you can keep an eye on him. If you see any great opportunity, you can send him off yourself. I'd like to see if Yi's affection for his brother will be so desperate that he will completely fight with the Su family. At that time, if he recklessly acts recklessly and things become more and more chaotic, maybe the traitor will also reveal a little." He stood up and smiled at Old Ma. Then he put his hand in his sleeve and touched the scorched stone, a blood-devouring insect that had been completely burned to ashes. Chapter 191. There were still 16 days until the next full moon night. The Su family worked hard in the sect, hoping to rescue Sumo. Because no matter what, they didn't believe that Sumo, who had been pampered and spoiled since she was a child, would have any relations with the cruel and vicious evildoers of the devil cult. In fact, it wasn't just the Su family who thought so. Most of the people from influential clans in Kunwu City also had similar views. Therefore, the rumor that He suddenly found trouble with the Su family was to vent his anger for the matter with Yigang a while ago naturally spread. This kind of rumor was very damaging and often made people unable to advance or retreat, making them very depressed. But this time He seemed to be determined to go through with it to the end. From beginning to end, he remained indifferent to the pressure from the outside world. Despite the pressure from the Su family, he still hadn't released Sumo. The activities of the Su family in the sect also encountered unexpected resistance. Almost all the Taoist masters in the Yuanying realm and above refused or declined the request to intercede on their behalf, including Su Qingjuan's Shifu, Masato Kihara. This deadlock lasted for a day or two, and the atmosphere in the Kunlun party suddenly changed. Many of the originally indignant and seemingly very angry clans suddenly became silent. They were all old foxes who had mingled in the mountains of Kunlun for several hundred years, who didn't know how to listen to the wind and who didn't know how to steer according to the wind. Although Su Qingjun quarreled with Sumo and the others a while ago and even taught them a lesson, causing her and her family to be in a cold war for a while, no matter what was said, Sumo was still her blood-related younger brother. But no matter what, Sumo was still her blood-related younger brother, and her parents were worried sick. She couldn't stay out of it, so she went to plead with her master, Master Muyuan. The whole Kunlun party knew Masato Kihara's love for Su Qingjun, but on that day he still shook his head and refused Su Qingjun. Su Qingjun was puzzled. Masato Kihara sighed. Seeing that there was no one around, she said to her softly, "Now is not like before. This matter already has the intention of Senior Immortal. They will definitely investigate it thoroughly and no one can stop them. You should also behave for the time being. Don't stand out at will." Su Qingjun was shocked. Her face turned pale and even her voice trembled as she whispered, "Shifu? Could it be that Hakushin Jinkuan actually did something to our Su family?" "Shut up." Masato Kihara's expression suddenly changed. She immediately opened her mouth to stop Su Qingjun, and then observed the surroundings. Although the two of them were in Masato Kihara's own cave, and it was almost impossible for ordinary people to eavesdrop on their conversation, but Masato Kihara's expression was as careful as a thief. After observing the surroundings for a while, Masato Kihara let out a sigh of relief. Then she pulled Su Qingjun to another secluded place and said, "Listen carefully. First, this matter is not targeted at your Su family. It's just that your younger brothers were unlucky and happened to encounter this matter. They also happened to give the truth to others, so naturally we have to investigate. But if there is a justifiable reason, then he will not make things too difficult for you. Didn't you see that Su Qian and Su Wen have both gone back?" Su Qingjun responded. Her complexion looked a little better, as if she had breathed a sigh of relief. However, she was still a little worried and asked in a low voice, "What about Su Mo?" Masato Kihara did not answer her question. She just snorted and said, "The second thing you don't know is that the one who pays attention to this matter is not Hakushin Jinkuin, but perfected Lord Tianlan." Su Qingjun was shocked and said, "Grandmaster Tianlan? How could he?" Masato Kihara said with a sullen face, "Although martial uncle Tianlan is not often in Kunlun Mountain, he is after all one of the two supreme perfected gods of Huashan realm in our sect. I heard that a few days ago, the senior suddenly wrote a letter in his own hand, sternly reprimanding sect leader Xianhua Shixiang, saying that in the Kunlun Mountains, a devil cult evildoer unexpectedly killed people, which is really a shocking matter. Moreover, after many days of investigation, there is still no progress, which is even more incompetent." Su Qingjuan's beautiful face turned pale when she heard this. Although she had not yet reached the highest level in the cultivation world like Jinren Yuanying, she had been influenced by aristocratic families since she was a child, and because of her outstanding talent she had followed Masato Kihara for a long time, so she still knew some of the changes in the sect. At this moment she subconsciously covered her mouth with her hand and said in surprise, "Grandmaster Tianlan, how could he speak to a mortal sect leader like this?" Masato Kihara smiled and said, "He is a perfected god of Huashan realm, and also the martial uncle of Idle Month. Of course he is qualified. Didn't you see that although Idle Month was unhappy at that time, he still gritted his teeth and endured it?" Su Qingjun was a smart person, and she quickly thought of another matter. She whispered, "Then Grandmaster Bai Qin?" Masato Kihara said lightly, "In this kind of matter, it is impossible for martial uncle Bai Qin to come forward and say anything." Su Qingjun nodded, but there was still a worried look on her face. Masato Kihara glanced at her, sighed and said, "Qingjun, you know that our Tieji is weak. Now there are undercurrents in the sect, and the open and secret struggles are all on the Kuinji side. Not to mention other things, just the two perfected gods who are in the open and in the dark, are not people we dare to get involved in at all. Otherwise, if those two get angry, the consequences will be unimaginable." Su Qingjun nodded silently and didn't say anything else. Masato Kihara thought for a moment and comforted her, "But in my opinion, if your brother really didn't do anything, he will suffer a little at most. It shouldn't be a big deal." Su Qingjun suddenly raised her head and said, "Master, is that true?" Masato Kihara smiled and said, "Now that perfected god Tianlan has suddenly come forward to put pressure, even sect master Idle Month martial uncle can't take it, let alone a little disciple. Therefore they must give an explanation. Under such circumstances they won't easily let off anyone who is even slightly suspicious, but they probably won't deliberately make a confession through torture. How can they fake it in front of a perfected god? So," he patted Su Qingjuan's shoulder and said gently, "Go back and tell the head of the Su family and the other family members that they have to temporarily endure it. It will be better after this period of time. Our Kunlun party is a famous sect with 5,000 years of history. The sect rules are strict, and we definitely won't wrongly accuse an innocent person." "All right," Su Qingjun said softly. These words were told by Masato Kihara to Su Qingjun in private. Many people who hadn't reached the level of perfected Yuanying couldn't see it so clearly. This was the case for the Su family. However, after Su Qingjun brought back this news, the head of the Su family, Su Tianhe, made a prompt decision to immediately cease all activities and prepare to listen to Masato Kihara's advice. There were some twists and turns in the process. Madame Bai, who was anxious for her son, was heartbroken and wanted to save him as soon as possible. She made a small fuss, but it was quickly suppressed by Su Tianhe. After sending off her family, Su Qingjun returned to the Flying Goose Terrace with worry for Sumo. She looked at the sky and saw that it was almost dark. She stood by the roadside for a while and saw that the door of the wooden house was closed. She could vaguely see a figure inside. She seemed to want to go over and say a few words, probably to chat with Luchin. However, in the end she walked back to the cave in the mountain wall without saying a word and didn't come out again for the whole day. Luchin lay in the wooden house and saw the appearance of Su Qingjun when she came back. However, he didn't have the intention to greet her. Instead, he stayed on the bed with Atsu in his arms and watched the sky turn dark and the moon rise. That night, the moon was already as thin as a hook, hanging alone in the sky. Atsu squatted on the bed beside him and looked up at the moon through the window, lost in thought. Luchin gently stroked Atu's head. He didn't know when, but Atu had fallen in love with the moon. It often stared at the bright moon for a long time, but it didn't howl at the moon like many wolves and dogs. It just silently looked at the moon, unusually quiet, but there was a strange aura emanating from its body, making people feel that it was different from the black dog in the past. The next day, the seemingly calm Kunlun mountain suddenly stirred up waves. Before noon, Sumo, who the Su family was worried about, had not been released, but he sent someone to ask a few people to his place. These people, including Lin Kuangyi and Zhang Ji, were all at the scene of the dispute in the Liuxiang garden that day. After hearing this news, Luchin had a bad feeling. Sure enough, someone came to Fian platform in the afternoon. That person was a Kunlun disciple from the Heavenly Soldier Hall. In terms of seniority, he was He Yi's junior. When he came here, his words were polite, but his attitude was very firm. He invited Su Qingjun and Luchin to go with him to meet He Yi. Everyone chatted. At this time, of course, no one was willing to chat with He Yi. He said he was chatting, but everyone knew that he had a bad idea. If they were not careful, they might be detained, and the detained people would not dare to resist. First, there was the strict rules of the Kunlun party, and this matter was personally ordered by the sect leader to track down the evildoer of the devil cult. Behind this, there was also the figure of the high and mighty perfected deity of Huashan. Who dared to offend such a person? Luchin and Su Qingjun did not intend to resist. They happily agreed and then followed the person to meet He Yi. But in his heart, Luchin greeted the damn baldy many times in a friendly manner. Previously, it was only said that He Yi detained people, but when they were really brought to the location, Luchin was stunned to discover that He Yi had actually placed the place where the suspect was detained and interrogated directly in the martyr's grave at the back of the nameless mountain peak. When he saw that black courtyard and confirmed that it was the location, Luchin suddenly had a kind of secret delight in his heart. Staying in this kind of place and not letting go, that person called Sumo would most likely suffer a lot these days. Different from Luchin, Su Qingjun had never been here before. Looking at this gloomy place, Su Qingjun, like almost everyone else, revealed a disgusted and surprised expression. It seemed that she had never thought that on the Kunlun mountain, there would actually be such a place. Although it was not fast, they still had to go. But when they were about to knock on the door, suddenly the black door outside the martyr's grave was suddenly opened. Then a person staggered out, his steps were somewhat unsteady. Looking closely, it was He Yi. Chapter 192. Luchin and Su Qingjun were both taken aback. After looking at each other, they both stopped in their tracks. The Kunlun disciple who led the way was also taken aback. He hurriedly rushed over and supported He Yi. He anxiously said, Xixiang, what happened to you?" He Yi waved his hand to indicate that he was fine. He then saw Su Qingjun and Luchin behind him and nodded to them. Seeing that his expression was generally normal, it didn't seem like something serious had happened. Su Qingjun and Luchin then walked over. Su Qingjun looked at He Yi and frowned. "Xixiang, what happened to you? Why do you look so pale?" He Yi smiled bitterly. He was about to say something when suddenly the others seemed to have sensed something. They all turned their heads to look in the direction of the black courtyard of the martyr's grave. They saw a gust of wind carrying bursts of smoke and dust suddenly soar into the air like an earth dragon, twisting in the courtyard. The sound of the wind was mournful. One could even faintly hear the sharp whistling sound of the air breaking. Even from far away, one could feel the strong spiritual power rolling near the wind vent. Lu Chen's expression changed slightly. Su Qingjun, who was next to him, also looked quite surprised. She said, "Someone is fighting inside?" Before her voice died away, the sound of the wind suddenly became 10 times stronger. It actually rushed directly towards the door. In an instant, sand and stones flew away. Su Qingjun's expression changed slightly in the wind. She suddenly reached out to grab Lu Chen's arm, intending to pull him back. Who knew that her grab would actually grab empty air? She looked back in surprise and found that Lu Qin was running much faster than her. In just a short while he had actually fled several feet away. It was no wonder that she couldn't catch Lu Qin. Su Qingjun snorted. She glared at Lu Qin in annoyance and awkwardness. She followed him and mumbled, "His cultivation is not high, but he runs fast." Lu Qin's ears were sharp and he actually heard these words. He smiled at Su Qingjun, who was walking over, and said, "I can't help it. It's not easy to get by in this world, and I don't have the invincible talent like you geniuses. Any one of you is enough to annoy us, the janitor disciples. So, you can do anything in cultivation, but you can't slack off in escaping. You talk too much." Su Qingjun first smiled, then scolded him. On the other side, he took in the two's conversation and expressions. He seemed to be deep in thought, but his expression didn't change much. After a while, the wind gradually weakened, and the earth dragon in the air seemed to be affected by some powerful force. It twisted more and more, and then suddenly broke in the middle and fell to the ground. Then the wind stopped. A person walked out from the black courtyard, and it was Dongfang Tao. The darkness rolled and rolled behind him, and one could vaguely see another withered and skinny figure. It was the corpse watcher, but he clearly didn't have much interest in the people outside the cemetery. Since this figure had appeared, the people who seemed to have been in a fierce battle just now were naturally Dongfang Tao and the corpse watcher. This discovery shocked Lu Qin and Su Qingjun. It should be known that Dongfang Tao had broken through to the Yuanying realm, and could be considered as another powerful figure in the Kunlun party. But the most surprising thing was the corpse watcher. Although he looked ugly and skinny like a lonely old man, or like an old man who had been decaying for many years, from the situation just now, this corpse watcher must have used all kinds of strange secret techniques. Compared to a true Yuanying realm master, he did not seem to be at a disadvantage. Of course, why these two people fought and why they suddenly stopped was not something Lu Qin and Su Qingjun could guess. Dongfang Tao said something to the corpse watcher, and it seemed that he was a little angry. The corpse watcher also responded with a few words, and it gave off a somewhat strange feeling, which immediately made Dongfang Tao angry again. But even so, in the end, Dongfang Tao actually suppressed his anger and left the back of the dark mountain peak. On Dongfang Tao's way out, he, Su Qingjun, and Lu Qin all lowered their heads and bowed to him. Dongfang Tao did not pay much attention to these young people, and at most nodded at he as a sign of respect. Watching Dongfang Tao swagger off, Lu Qin and Su Qingjun finally reached the edge of the doorway. He was one step ahead of them and rushed into the courtyard first. He looked at the corpse watcher and said, "Senior, look, you guys do what you need to do, don't mind me." The corpse watcher said coldly, then turned around and walked into the darkness, looking completely different from usual. He let out a long sigh and turned to greet Su Qingjun before chatting idly. Lu Qin listened on the side as if he did not exist. After some hypocritical pleasantries, Su Qingjun asked he, "Senior brother he, why did you call us over?" He waved his hand and said, "It's not a big deal. It's just that He Changxing's death was very tragic, and some higher-ups in the sect couldn't stand it, so they gave the order to thoroughly investigate the matter." He paused for a moment and his smile was a little modest, but also a little depressed, so much so that no one could tell what he was thinking in his heart. "It just so happens that the two of you were in the flowing fragrance garden that day, and were also there when the quarrel happened." Lu Qin and Su Qingjun's faces suddenly darkened, and Su Qingjun said to he with a dark face, "Senior brother he, you called us over without any evidence. I'm afraid it's a little too much." He's expression did not change and he said indifferently, "If the two of you have any opinions about me, you can go directly to sect leader Idlemonth to complain. Once there's an order I will naturally stop." This order would not be obtained, and Su Qingjun's heart was as clear as a mirror. She took a deep breath and said, "If that's the case, if there's anything, senior brother he, you can ask. But before that, I want to go see my good-for-nothing brother, is that okay?" "I'm afraid that's not very convenient." He directly refused and then said to Su Qingjun with great respect, "Su junior sister, actually don't have to worry too much, we still have some questions to ask other than Master Su, to see if they are in cahoots with the evildoers of the evil faction." Su Qingjun snorted and said, "Anyway you called us over, are you suspecting our identities?" "That won't be the case." He smiled and said, "Even if I suspect anyone, I won't suspect you. But what needs to be done still needs to be done. In view of the fact that there are many evil faction spies in the cultivation world, it's really hard to guard against them. I was a little rude to the two of you, please forgive me." Immediately after, he did not say any more superfluous words, and directly started to interrogate them, and in the middle of it, he even separated the two of them for a period of time. He did not ask many things, but the consecutive questions were somewhat difficult to answer, among which the most crucial one was the night he Changxing died, where was the person being interrogated. Originally, 3 members of the Su family were arrested, but after Su Wen and Su Chen explained where they went that day, they were released. Instead, Sumo, who had been hemming and hawing and refused to clearly state where she was that night, was directly detained. He seemed to really do what he said, and did not make things difficult for Su Qingjun, but when facing Lu Chen he seemed to show another side. He started to interrogate Lu Chen where he was that night. Would there be anyone who could prove it? Lu Chen thought for a while and realized that he would always be alone, unable to prove others and unable to prove himself. He immediately became hostile and announced to Su Qingjun, "I'm going to keep this person for now and interrogate him." Su Qingjun argued with reason and was unwilling to let Lu Chen stay, but he refused to let him go, and only said that he would not harm Lu Chen, but he really wanted to interrogate him. Until now, Sumo had not finished asking, so she did not let him go. Of course, Lu Chen was also unwilling to stay, but seeing that he was determined, he gave Su Qingjun a look, signaling her to calm down. With the advice from her master, Masato Kihara, Su Qingjun knew the vast and profound background behind this matter, and naturally felt a bit of respect. And Lu Chen was often away who would really care about this. And the real reason why Lu Chen agreed to stay was actually because he was curious about this grave, the mysterious corpse watcher, and those dead people. He brought everyone to this gloomy grave for interrogation, and whether there were other hidden motives. Lu Chen suddenly wanted to see the face of the person who had been caught and refused to let go. In the end, the two of them came together but left alone. This scene made Su Qingjun feel a bit uncomfortable, and the gaze she stared at He was particularly unfriendly. He smiled bitterly and did not explain much and sent Su Qingjun away. In fact, if it was possible, he also wanted Su Qingjun to stay, but in this way most people on Taiji's side would speak up, and the Su family would be completely enraged and they might do anything. That kind of chaos was not what he wanted, nor was it what Immortal Idol Month and his master, Dukan Jinren, wanted. Lu Chen was brought to a dark room. In this gloomy place, because of this place's special purpose, even the room looked particularly scary. According to he was tired today and asked Lu Chen to rest first and talk tomorrow. Lu Chen did not refute and silently accepted He's words. Until he was in this dark room, and when he began to try to see and explore the surroundings, he suddenly heard a weak and painful voice from the corner of the room containing fear. "Save me, save me, save me." Lu Chen immediately stopped and turned to look at the place where the voice came from. After a moment he suddenly walked a few steps in that direction and came to a corner. Then he squatted down and looked at the figure who was huddled up in the corner. He sighed and said, "Young Master Su, how are you?" Chapter 193. To tell the truth, Lu Chen did not expect that he would be able to see Sumo so quickly and smoothly. Originally he thought that Sumo, as the only suspect and detained suspect, would at least be locked up in some secret place and strictly guarded. Who knew that he would actually appear to be somewhat careless and directly locked the two of them together. This action was not normal, or it should be said that it was not normal at all. Whether Sumo was the evil sect spy or not had not been determined. Casually locked up with other people, wouldn't it be dangerous? Also, that day when Su Qingjun returned to the Su family and made a big fuss, Lu Chen was tormented and seriously injured by Sumo and the rest. These things were not difficult to find out. Lu Chen did not believe that a scheming person like he would not know about it. And now that he was locked up with Sumo, there seemed to be some meaning in it. These thoughts flashed through Lu Chen's mind like a spark, but there was not much change in his expression. Only looking at the man who was hiding in the corner in the dark room and moaning for help, he could vaguely see that he was the once arrogant Sumo. Lu Chen greeted Sumo, but Sumo did not respond to him. Her mouth was still muttering those two simple words. Lu Chen frowned, squatted down in front of him and saw clearly that Sumo had shrunk into a ball, buried her head on her knees, her hands behind her head as if she was very afraid. Save me, sister, save me." Sumo was still speaking intermittently in a low voice. Her voice seemed to be trembling. Instead she did not respond to Lu Chen, who was very close at hand. Lu Chen reached out and gently patted Sumo's shoulder. Sumo's body shrank a little, but it seemed to be an instinctive reaction. There was no other movement. This situation seemed a little strange. Lu Qin stared at Sumo and did not speak. He fell into deep thought. After a while he suddenly stood up and looked around. This was a dark room. Most of the rooms in the martyr's tomb were like this. Because it was too dark, it was sometimes hard to tell how big the room was. And in this room there was a place where the darkness was especially thick, right against the wall of the room. Lu Qin stared at the thick darkness, then looked at his surroundings. After a while the corners of his mouth suddenly curled up. He sneered, and there seemed to be a hint of ridicule in his smile. By the time Su Qingjun returned to Flying Goose Terrace alone, the sky had already darkened. She was in a bad mood. All kinds of dark and strange scenes kept appearing in front of her eyes. She was a little worried, even more worried than before. She was worried about her brother, Sumo, and also worried about Lu Qin. As she walked on the mountain path, Su Qingjun made up her mind to go to the gloomy martyr's tomb again tomorrow morning. No matter what, she had to try her best to save them. Although there might be all kinds of inexplicable undercurrents behind this matter, it had nothing to do with Sumo and Lu Qin. When she walked up to Flying Goose Terrace, her body suddenly paused. In the cold night, she saw a black dog squatting alone in front of the wooden house, looking at the mountain path here. After a while, Atsu got up and slowly walked over. When it came to Su Qingjuan's side, it first looked behind her. When it found that there was no one there, Atsu raised its head to look at Su Qingjun and softly barked. Su Qingjun did not have much contact with this black dog. Because Lu Qin insisted on bringing Atsu with him, she did not mind and let Atsu live on Flying Goose Terrace, and they only met a few times. But tonight, she felt that Atsu seemed to be a little different from usual, but she could not tell what was different. Perhaps it was because they had too little contact. Su Qingjun sighed and said to Atsu, "Are you waiting for Lu Qin, Atsu?" Atsu looked at her and wagged its tail. Because it was injured, it only had one eye and half of its tail left. When it wagged its tail, it looked a little funny. Looking at its one eye and the remaining scars on its face, it gave people a sense of tragedy. These two completely different feelings were strangely mixed on this black dog. Su Qingjun felt a little apologetic in her heart, but then she felt a little funny. Looking at Atsu, she did not know why, but she still felt a little uncomfortable. She softly said, "Lu Qin has been detained, he can't come back tonight. But I have already thought about it. I will go there tomorrow. No matter what they find out, as long as I can't confirm that he is the traitor, I will definitely bring him back, okay?" Atsu quietly looked at Su Qingjun. The light in its only eye was dim and uncertain. The half of its tail behind it had unknowingly stopped. Su Qingjun saw that Atsu didn't respond for a long time. She didn't know if he understood her words, so she could only sigh softly. She then turned around and walked into the cave residence. She opened the stone door and walked in. The heavy stone door closed behind her, and the Flying Goose platform once again fell into silence. The night became colder. The black dog slowly stood up and walked to the edge of the cliff. It looked at the vast sea of clouds in silence. Its only eye lit up with a dark green light, like a crystal-clear gem, but also like the deep sea. It slowly raised its head and looked at the dark night sky. This night the clouds were very thick, blocking the moonlight and the stars. It was as if there was only darkness left in this world. It stood there alone, the night wind getting tighter and colder. It looked up at the sky, its black fur swaying and its dark green eyes shining. Suddenly, it raised its head and howled at the sky, at the night sky, at the dark clouds, or at the cold moon that could not be seen but must be hidden high up in the sky. A woo, the mournful howl echoed above the sea of clouds, lingering for a long time. Su Qingjun did get up early the next morning. After dressing up, she walked out of the cave ready to go to the cemetery. When she left the Flying Goose platform, she glanced at the wooden house, but she did not see Atsu, so she thought that maybe the black dog was still sleeping. Su Qingjun got up very early, but on the same morning, there was someone else who got up even earlier than her. He walked through the long street of Kunwu City, which had not yet become lively. Although the street was not lively, there were already some pedestrians. The fat old ma yawned. He saw a stall selling breakfast on the side of the road ahead, so he walked over and sat down. This kind of roadside stall, of course, sold food for mortals in the secular world. There was no such thing as food made of various spiritual materials, so ordinary cultivators would not patronize this place. However, old Ma was obviously more like a mortal. He casually sat down, ordered some steaming hot breakfast and hot porridge and ate them in big mouthfuls. His forehead was slightly sweaty, and it was only then that he seemed to heave a sigh of relief, looking a bit more comfortable. "It's so cold tonight," he said with some emotion. He then turned his head to the north and glanced at the majestic Kunlun mountain range. Even the tall city walls of Kunwa City couldn't block the rise and fall of the majestic mountain range. Old Ma pursed his lips and said to himself, "I've done what I should. You better not bother me. Let's see what you do next." He was in a daze for a while, then he called the stall owner to pay the bill. The stall owner was an old man, so he came over to settle the bill. When he turned around to leave, he suddenly saw Old Ma's hand, so he reminded Old Ma, "Sir, your hand is bleeding." Old Ma looked down and saw some blood between the fingers of his left hand. He immediately smiled and said to the stall owner, "Ah, I didn't expect to cut my hand. Thank you, boss. I'll go bandage it later." The old man chuckled, put away the bowls and chopsticks and walked away. Old Ma stood up and walked back to the street. As he walked, he calmly wiped his left hand under his sleeve. That trace of blood was wiped on it, then it disappeared from his hand. He happily and contentedly walked forward, just like an ordinary person. At this time, the street gradually became lively and more people appeared. No one noticed a fat man with bloodstains on his hand gradually walked into the crowd and disappeared. He did not sleep well that night. The Yin energy in the righteous grave was too heavy, it was really not suitable for ordinary people to live in. Even for a foundation establishment realm cultivator like him, living here for a long time would also feel uncomfortable. If one lived in this kind of shady place for a long time, perhaps even one's temperament would become strange, just like that corpse watcher. He was actually curious about the corpse watcher. This skinny and shriveled old man was mysterious and obviously powerful. He also seemed to have some unexplainable grudges with the newly promoted Yuanying Jinren Dongfang Tao, which made him even more unfathomable. But right now, these were not the things that he was most concerned about. He was recommended by Dukan Jinren to sect leader Idle Month Jinren. He was wholeheartedly pursuing that evil faction spy murder case. However, this matter had been dragged on for a long time, he was actually feeling a great deal of pressure. And because of this, he had no choice but to gradually turn his methods more intense. It was already too late to use the previous gentle and tactful methods. Teacher and sect leader Reverend, they could not continue to indulge like that. He felt wronged, this evil faction spy's methods were ruthless but unusually cautious. Even with his very familiar experience with the evil faction, after so long, he still could not find any reliable clues. But in his heart he did not blame those two teachers. Without them he would still be in closed-door training and reflecting on his mistakes. Without them he would not have been able to come out and do things so early. He even felt a little ashamed and felt that he had let down his teacher and sect leader Reverend. So, today he felt that the reason why he could not calm down last night was because he did not do a good job. Then today he must think of a way to carefully interrogate the two people who were currently detained, and strive to find out something. If there were any results based on this merit, he would definitely be able to let his younger brother, He Gang, return to the Kunlun party. When he thought of this, his somewhat heavy heart lightened up a lot. When he strode out of the room, he probably thought of his younger brother, the corners of his mouth carried a trace of a smile. But the moment he walked to the courtyard, he was suddenly stunned. On the grave's black main entrance, the room door was opened, but he did not know when, but there was a black dog standing outside. The black dog was staring at him. Chapter 194. Of course he had never seen one before. Or rather, even if he had, he would not have cared about such an ordinary black dog. However, when he saw the black dog he was still slightly shocked. He was curious as to why a dog would appear in such a shadowy place where all living creatures and creatures avoided it. He was also surprised at the mutilations and scars on the black dog's body. This was a dog that had clearly been severely injured. Not only was it covered in scars, its one eye and half a tail made it even uglier and more frightening. He was also a normal person. When he first saw the black dog, he frowned and his eyes were filled with disgust. However, very soon, He's gaze changed slightly and his expression softened. This change was not because he had suddenly become kind and compassionate, but because he had suddenly thought of his younger brother, He Gang. Because he had been surrounded by a pack of black jackals in the disorientated lands, He Gang had been severely injured and disfigured. Now, after a series of twists and turns, he did not look like a human or a ghost. As his older brother, his heart ached for him. For some reason, when he saw this black dog, he suddenly thought of He Gang and felt an inexplicable sense of compassion. So, he did not immediately chase the black dog away. Instead, he stood and watched for a while before walking over. The black dog looked at his figure in silence and did not move. It did not retreat nor did it hide. There was a strange light flowing in its single eye as it stared at He's figure. He walked to the door and glanced at the black dog, then looked outside the door to confirm that there was no one outside. It seemed that no one had deliberately brought this dog here. However, this made it even more strange. After staying in the righteous grave for several days, He had long noticed that the yin qi in this place was extremely strong. It was the enemy of almost all living creatures. In this righteous grave, there was not even a mouse or a cockroach, let alone wild beasts or birds. Could it be that because this dog was black, it was not afraid of this pitch-black righteous grave? This ridiculous thought flashed through He's mind. Even he himself felt bored, but he still had a good impression of this black dog. He waved his hand at the black dog and said, "This is not a place for you. Leave quickly." As he spoke, he made a gesture to drive it away. The black dog took 2 steps back. Although it was still staring at He, perhaps because he did not show too much hostility before, and even had a little bit of gentleness to it, the black dog did not react too aggressively to He. It glanced at the courtyard of the righteous grave and seemed a little hesitant. The darkness and the strange atmosphere inside made it very uncomfortable and it did not want to go in. So, after a moment of hesitation, the black dog retreated more than 10 feet away and found a large tree to lie down, as if it was waiting for something. He glanced over there and shook his head. He was too lazy to care about it. He couldn't even take care of the person, so who would have the time to care about the dog? He turned and walked into the depths of the courtyard. The door to the room where Sumo and Lu Qin, who had just arrived yesterday, was still locked. In the darkness on the other side, the corpse walked out of the shadows like a ghost. He nodded at him and looked at the tightly shut door again. There was a hint of worry on his face as he asked the corpse, "Senior, will they be all right?" The corpse's face was haggard and his expression seemed to always be as rigid as ever. After hearing He's question, he only replied faintly, "They won't die." He shook his head and seemed to smile bitterly. He then sighed and asked, "Did you find anything?" The corpse replied, "Under the influence of the mind-manipulating spell, their souls were agitated and injured, causing them to fall into a terrifying illusion. Their words are definitely true, so it shouldn't be them." He was silent. Seeing that the corpse ignored him, he casually waved in the direction of the door. A cold wind suddenly rose and swept across the courtyard. The door on the other side suddenly opened with a squeak. He frowned and walked into the room. After a while, he dragged 2 people out, one in each hand, and placed them on the ground. The 2 people were, of course, Sumo and Lu Qin. Between the two, Lu Qin's face was ashen and his eyes were lifeless. He sat on the ground with a blank gaze, unable to even focus on He and the corpse. Occasionally he would mutter a few words in a low voice, but it was unclear what he was saying. As for Sumo, his condition was even worse than Lu Qin. Probably because he had stayed here for a longer period of time. His entire person looked like an idiot, drooling and his eyes slanted. He looked completely different from that young master from before. He took a glance at Lu Qin and then most of his attention was still on Sumo. After watching for a long while, he suddenly stood up and said to the corpse, "Senior, this time many thanks for your help. But I think this matter should end here. As for how to track the evil sect's evil people, I will think of a way myself." The corpse's expression did not change. He only glanced at him and coldly said, "I owe you a little favor, that's why I helped you. Since you don't need it, naturally I won't care anymore." He sighed and said, "The main thing is that Senior's mind-manipulating spell is really too overbearing. I'm afraid if this goes on, these 2 people's minds will be completely destroyed. That odd-job disciple doesn't matter, but Sumo is after all a person with a family background. It's not good to mess around." "As you wish. But remember, after this time don't come and bother me again," the corpse said indifferently, then he turned around and walked into the depths of the courtyard. Before he left, his ghost claw-like palm waved at Sumo and Lu Qin. A few rays of gray light floated up from their bodies and followed him into the darkness. Sumo and Lu Qin's bodies suddenly shook. A moment later, their heads tilted and they both fainted on the ground. He walked over to take their pulse. He felt that these 2 people's pulse had gradually calmed down. He nodded his head in relief. After all, the Kunlun party was a place with rules. It did not allow him to act recklessly. If he really wrongly accused a good person and killed someone, even his master and the sect leader might not be able to protect him. After the mind-manipulating spell was lifted, between Sumo and Lu Qin did not seem to have changed much. On the other hand, Sumo's complexion was much better. At least the idiotic look of her crooked mouth and slanted eyes was gone. Her facial expression gradually returned to normal, but she still did not look too good. After about an hour, he suddenly heard a call from the entrance of the martyr's tomb. "Senior brother He." He turned around and saw Su Qingjun standing at the doorstep with a solemn expression. She was looking in his direction. Then her gaze fell on the two people lying on the ground. She immediately looked surprised and worried. He cupped his hands at her and said, "Good morning, junior sister Su." Su Qingjun walked over slowly. She seemed to still be suppressing her emotions to keep calm. She said, "What happened to them?" He said, "They were just released to get some fresh air." Su Qingjun's expression turned cold. She said, "What did you do to them?" He shook his head and said, "I didn't do anything. But I have already asked what I needed to ask. The two of them should have nothing to do with He Changxing's death. So when they wake up later you can take them back." Su Qingjun was startled. Then her face revealed a happy expression. At this moment, there was a sudden groan from the ground. Lu Chen was the first to wake up. Not long after, Sumo also woke up. He looked around blankly. His eyes were still a little scattered. After a while he seemed to suddenly find Su Qingjun. His expression suddenly changed. He rushed over and hugged Su Qingjun. He shouted, "Sister, sister." Su Qingjun showed a pained expression. She reached out and patted his back to comfort him. At the same time she looked at Lu Chen. She found that although Lu Chen's expression was a little strange, he could still control himself. He stood up shakily. Their eyes met. Lu Chen grinned, indicating that he was fine. Su Qingjun took a deep breath. She looked at He and said coldly, "Senior brother He, since you are fine, can we go?" He nodded and said, "Forgive me for not seeing you off." Su Qingjun supported Sumo. Lu Chen also looked a little weak, but he still walked alone. When they walked out of the gate of the martyr's grave, a black shadow suddenly walked out from a corner in front of them. The black dog stood quietly on the side of the road. It did not look at Su Qingjun and Sumo. It only looked at Lu Chen. Then it gently wagged its tail and walked towards Lu Chen. When Lu Chen saw Atsu, his expression changed slightly. He then glanced at Su Qingjun. Su Qingjun shook her head and said, "I didn't bring it here. I don't know how Atsu came here by itself." After a moment of silence, Lu Chen nodded and said, "I know. You can go first. I'll go back to the Flying Goose Terrace later." Su Qingjun hesitated for a moment. But Sumo's situation was indeed worse. She also had to send him back to the Su family in Kunwa City as soon as possible, so she couldn't care about Lu Chen now. So in the end she softly said, "I'll take Sumo back. After I settle him down, I'll come back to see you as soon as possible." Lu Chen smiled and said, "I'm fine. Don't worry." Su Qingjun responded and supported Sumo as they left. In the martyr's grave, the aura of darkness seemed to be everywhere, lingering around him and Atsu. Lu Chen squatted in front of Atsu and looked at Atsu. Atsu's only eye was also looking at him. He didn't know why, but he felt that the light in Atsu's eyes was somewhat different from before. But he didn't care. He just smiled and stroked Atsu's head, saying, "You've become smarter, stupid dog." Atsu silently shook its head. Lu Chen stood up and said to it, "Let's go home." The man and the dog walked outside. Just as they were about to walk out of the darkness, an anxious figure suddenly ran over from a distance. His face was filled with anger and anxiety. He rushed past them and ran into the depths of the darkness. Lu Chen's footsteps paused and he turned around to look at that person's back. Then he expressionlessly turned around and continued to walk out, stepping into the warm light. Chapter 195. The bustling streets of Kunwa City were filled with people coming and going as usual. It was as peaceful and prosperous as if all living things were happy. In the distance, Kunlun Mountain was lofty and majestic. The sun was warm on Fian platform. Lu Chen was lying on the bed of his wooden house, quietly looking at the scenery outside the window. Far away from the hustle and bustle of the city, in the small courtyard of the Black Hill Pavilion, Old Ma was sitting there. He had changed his clothes, carried a basin of water, and was carefully washing his hands. The blood stains made the water a little red. He looked at the red color with a strange expression. He stretched out a finger and gently drew a few strokes on the reddish spots in the water. It seemed like he was stirring randomly, but it also seemed like he was writing a word. Faint traces of blood gently circled around his fingertips, floating and dispersing in the water, so that the word couldn't take shape. Soon even the blood itself disappeared. Old Ma raised his head and looked at the sky. After a moment of silence, he pulled a piece of cloth from the side and carefully wiped his palm clean, not leaving the slightest trace. The morning wind blew through Kunwu City, bringing with it a slight chill. A group of people gathered outside the gate of a certain house. There was a faint smell of blood in the air. It was coming from that house. The crowd of onlookers looked a little excited, as if they had lived ordinary lives for too long and finally had a lively scene to watch. However, from beginning to end, no one tried to enter the courtyard. Who was a fool these days? Being wise to stay out of trouble was the right thing to do. Later, a figure suddenly flew over from afar and rushed into the house like an arrow leaving the bow. Because his speed was so fast, there was even a sharp whistling sound as he broke through the air, making people unable to clearly see his figure and face. Immediately after, several figures rushed over and landed at the gate of the house. The difference was that they all clearly appeared in front of the crowd. The crowd of onlookers suddenly became restless because the people standing guard in front of the gate were cultivators wearing the uniform of Kunlun party disciples. The person who rushed in the front with the fastest speed was He. The place he rushed into was the residence of his younger brother, He Gang, several times before. When he received the news and rushed here, when he smelled the faint smell of blood, his heart slowly sank until he rushed into the courtyard and saw the bloody scene. He Gang was lying on the ground in the middle of the courtyard, already dead. There was also a blood stain on his side from his bedroom to the place where he died. It seemed that he had struggled to crawl from there. He had lost a lot of blood, so his skin looked a little pale, which made his already disfigured face look even more terrifying. He Gang's eyes were still wide open as if he had died with a grievance, but no one knew what he had seen before he died. He stood there stiffly looking at the corpse on the ground in a daze. Just a few days ago he was still sitting together with him, looking forward to the beautiful days in the future, and even exaggeratedly thinking about what kind of good sister-in-law he should find for his brother in the future. Sometimes he really thought that he and his younger brother could live well like this, that he would become successful and famous, that he would be successful in his cultivation, and that he would take good care of him for the rest of his life. The past flashed past his mind like scenes from the lonely childhood, the brothers who depended on each other for survival, to supporting each other for so many years, from when he was young to now, from when he was young to when he was mature. The only thing that never changed was his smile, Big Brother. At this moment, like a death knell, the sound of Big Brother rang again and again in his ears. He only felt that his heart was beating crazily, as if it was about to explode. He thought that he was going crazy, shouting and yelling, but in the end he could not make a sound. He just staggered forward and then knelt down beside his younger brother's corpse. The smell of blood assaulted his nostrils. He suddenly felt like vomiting. His hand trembled a little, and he slowly reached over and gently touched He Gang's head. His younger brother's head shook slightly, but there was no reaction. Where he touched it, his fingertips felt a trace of coldness that seemed to seep into his bones. He clenched his teeth, his mouth silently contorting for a moment. Then he lowered his head, his entire body tensed up and trembled. He forcefully swallowed all the anger and pain. He's dead, he's dead, he's dead. There was a bitter smile on his face, but there were no tears, only desolation. Then he gently used his hand to wipe his younger brother's eyes, wanting him to at least rest in peace, but after trying a few times he found that the eyes could not close. He slowly retracted his hand. "All right," he said softly, "just open your eyes. Big Brother promises you I will help you get revenge." He Gang's face did not change. The matter of having a spirit after death seemed to be just a legend after all. He lowered his head and was silent for a very long time. Then he quietly began to help his younger brother tidy up his body, smoothing his clothes and straightening his body. Then he found that He Gang had a hand under his body. He tried to pull his hand out, but when he flipped over He Gang's body halfway, his body suddenly trembled, and his movements abruptly stopped. After a moment he relaxed his movements, lightly pulling He Gang's body to the side, revealing the piece of ground he was originally pressing down on. One of He Gang's hands was still there, his fingers stained with dark red blood, using blood to write a crooked and terrifying character on the ground. So, that crooked character was like a sharp blade that was stabbed into his chest, that dripping blood, imprinted in his eyes like a burning scarlet flame. He stared at that character, the muscles at the corners of his eyes twitching slightly. At this time the sound of footsteps came from behind him. It was the junior brothers that he brought with him walking in. He seemed to want to say something, but he quickly closed his mouth. A trace of a desolate smile appeared at the corners of his mouth, and then it quickly disappeared. His face became gloomy and in the end, indifferent. He stood up and with a step he stepped on that character. The several Kunlun disciples next to him walked over. When they saw the bloody scene, they all had frightened, angry and unbearable expressions on their faces. One after another they came up to comfort Heir. Heir slowly nodded and without saying anything else he only said in a soft voice, "Thank you, junior brothers, for helping me." As he said this he slowly walked forward, but as he lifted his foot, there seemed to be an infinitely heavy pressure on his shoulder. When he took a step forward, a dazzling trail of blood appeared under his foot, and it was a bloody mess. Some people helped him to the side to rest, while others sighed and prepared to clean up the mess. In the middle of it all they glanced at the ground. In the middle of it there was nothing but fresh blood on the ground. Only when the sun shone down, it illuminated the bloody and tragic shadow. There were still 13 days until the next full moon night. There was some turmoil in the Kunlun party, and it was about Heir. His only relative, his younger brother, Hegang, was suddenly killed in Kunwu City, and his body was thrown in the courtyard. When the news came, He was so grieved that he almost couldn't do anything, so the murder case of He Changxing, which caused a lot of trouble, suddenly quieted down. Dukan Jinren, who cherished his disciple, once again summoned He back in the name of closed-door meditation. He went to the sect master, Reverend Idle Month, to ask for forgiveness, and took all the responsibility. But Reverend Idle Month was also open-minded and didn't really pursue the matter. In any case they were all from the same sect. If someone was to blame, they could only blame the devil cult's evil man for being too treacherous and cunning. It was just that in the sect, everyone seemed to hate the devil cult to the bone and felt indignant about the injustice, but in private, there were some whispers that couldn't be brought to the surface. Hegang didn't die earlier or later, but he died when He was investigating the murder case on a large scale, and he died after He detained the Su family? The water was deep. Many people said so with a meaningful smile on their faces. The Su family, on the other hand, remained silent. Originally, when they brought Sumo back, they were indignant and wanted to fight back and take revenge. But suddenly, overnight, all the Su family were directly locked up at home by Su Tianhe, and were not allowed to go out easily. The atmosphere in the Kunlun party was a little strange, but in any case, things that didn't come out publicly, everyone could pretend that it didn't happen. Life still had to go on. When the moon at night began to slowly become full from the smallest crescent, Lu Chen also went out several times in the middle of the night, hoping to encounter the strange three-eyed bug again, but he didn't find anything. That night really seemed like a dream, everything seemed to be the same as before, nothing had changed. Until one night he suddenly saw Atsu lying on the windowsill, suddenly raised his head and howled at the dark sky, and heard that mournful long cry. Lu Chen suddenly sat up. After the long cry, Atsu turned to look at him and suddenly jumped out of the window. Without any hesitation, Lu Chen directly jumped out and then followed Atsu, all the way to the forest behind the mountain of Flying Goose Terrace. The dark forest emitted a deep darkness under the night sky, and the old and sturdy trees were like tall giants, but Atsu didn't seem to have any fear and directly ran into the forest. Lu Chen followed, ran all the way and gradually came to the depths of the forest. Then somewhere Atsu suddenly stopped, and Lu Chen also slowed down and stood beside it. He first looked at it and then looked around. It was a little dark, but he could see the shadow of a big stone in front of him, and there seemed to be some things around it. Lu Chen's expression suddenly changed. He took a few steps forward and then gradually saw the things there. Beside the stone, there were many corpses of birds and small animals, all of them were bitten to death. He suddenly turned back and stared at Atsu, only to see that in the darkness, the dim light in Atsu's eyes gradually lit up, and gradually became brighter. Like a dark green flame. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.